The world changed the day portals opened between reality and the gaming space. From the depths of other dimensions, dark forces poured onto Earth, and along with them, dungeons began to appear. Dark labyrinths inhabited by monsters. People were faced with a threat that none of them were prepared for. The system chose certain people, giving them the power of players. These people gained access to interface windows and skills that had previously seemed like fantasy, and began exploring and plundering dungeons. With each passing day, their greed and avarice grew, and none of them noticed how a special-level dungeon, the Abyss, opened. Its ruler was an ancient and powerful lord, Adhisalai, the immortal prince of darkness. Unlike the earthly players, he had no system, but had power over darkness and armies of monsters. Player Lu gathered the strongest squad for a raid on his lair, and the brave heroes set out to meet the final battle. Adhisalai knew that the enemies were approaching. He felt in his bones that they were approaching. He ordered his troops to destroy anyone without exception who dared to enter. A bloody battle broke out in the dungeon. Waves of monsters crushed people, and desperate players in response burned mana, broke blades, and fell dead. Many died, and the blame for their deaths lay with the prince. And then an angel appeared in the sky, a heavenly warrior who came to destroy the Lord of Darkness. The Battle of the Titans began. Two powerful forces clashed in a duel not for life, but for death. Adhisalai rained down blows. The angel parried, their blades cutting through the air. In the end, the prince managed to disarm his enemy and raise his sword for the final blow. But at that moment, he was called out. The voice said that his entire family, wife, children, loved ones, were being held captive. And if he continued the fight, they would be executed. Adhisalai did not want to believe it, but when he looked, he saw that it was true. They were tied up, powerless, vulnerable. His entire family was in the hands of people. His heart trembled. In that moment, when he was distracted, the angel struck. The sword pierced the prince, mortally and treacherously. There was no talk of justice. It was a massacre where everyone was ready to betray for the sake of victory. But Adhisalai had no intention of dying alone. The angel asked him what he was doing, and the prince answered coldly that he was going to take them all with him. He used his last strength. The raid ended with the death of the boss and terrible losses for both sides. The world seemed to have regained its silence. But the story was not over. 10 years have passed. A new generation of players has ventured into the Burial Fields dungeon. Their commander, a tough woman, ordered them to hold formation and not disperse. But as soon as they entered, they were met by a nightmare. A monster nicknamed Stitch. He charged at the group, and the fight turned into a massacre. Stitch's smashing everything around him with fury. Panic gripped the players. They rushed in different directions, trying to hide from these furious blows. The commander, watching her men die, ordered the weak recruits to join the fight. One of them objected. Their task was to gather resources. They did not have the strength to fight. But orders are not discussed. The boy realized they were being used as bait. But deep down, he realized this was an opportunity. A chance to risk life and escape from insignificance. A chance to create a different future for my little sister. He stepped towards the monster. His weak armor did not protect him from blows, but he noticed a weak spot in Stitch's body and prepared to attack. But at that moment, a treacherous spear pierced his chest, depriving him of any hope for a happy ending. One of the allies decided to get rid of the burden. It was Andrea, whose view he was blocking. As he fell, he remembered his sister. He had promised to come back, and he couldn't die like this. Stitches raised his club and was about to bring it down on the young man. It seemed that everything was over, but the earth shook, and a stream of energy burst forth from the depths. It pierced the boy's body, burning away his old essence. The soul was reborn. He rose from the ground, different, stronger, more alive. The monster rushed again, but this time the young man did not flinch. With one blow, he destroyed Stitches. For his victory, the system rewarded him with experience. His level, previously insignificant, first soared to 5th. The players around him couldn't believe it. They had taken dozens of lives to defeat this enemy, and he had won alone. The commander decided that it was a scam. She couldn't believe that an ordinary guy with no abilities could do something like that. But Adisalai saw the system notification. His soul had awakened. He had waited for this for 10 years, recovering from an ancient wound. And now the system gave him access to an exclusive right, a power that no one else had. He smiled. The Demon King was returning. His enemies had to prepare for this encounter. He managed to destroy the skeleton mage without much difficulty. However, this did not bring a level increase, only a few experience points. Adisalai frowned. The player's system remained silent, and the unlocked boss panel he had worked so hard to obtain did not provide any noticeable advantage. Everything seemed useless, as if the world was deliberately holding back his growth. The only consolation was the ability to open the closed boxes. He had recently unlocked the ability Conqueror's Gaze and could now assess an enemy's level and skills with just a flick of his eye. This gave him a tactical advantage, although he himself understood that cunning alone was not enough to survive in this world. Even before meeting the monster, Adisalai had been thinking about his own steps. Deep down, he had long since decided that at the right moment, he would get rid of all the players who were near him in the dungeon. For him, they were not allies or even a hindrance, but rather a resource and a temporary screen behind which one could hide one's true intentions. Each of them was of value only as a human shield or bait for enemies, and none of them were trustworthy. However, one figure stood out among them, Andrea. Her level was too high for him to underestimate the danger. He was well aware that this girl possessed such strength that at the slightest attempt at open confrontation, she could wipe him off the face of the earth with a single blow. Fighting her meant certain death, but if played right, you could make her do the dirty work herself. Adisalai chose a wait-and-see tactic. Politeness, subordination, and apparent obedience were only a carefully chosen mask. He was waiting for the right moment to use Andrea's power against her, to point her weapon in the right direction, and ultimately turn everything to his advantage. And at that moment, when the air in the dungeon began to tremble from a strange hum, he realized that the time was near. Suddenly the space was illuminated by a deathly blue flame. It was not like an ordinary fire. The light came from everywhere, and at the same time seemed to draw with it a coldness that made the heart shrink. The players looked at each other, alarm flashing in their eyes. No one understood what exactly was happening, but the feeling of impending disaster was becoming unbearable. Adisalai immediately grasped the essence. He knew that in the depths was hidden what the whole dungeon was created for. As soon as he sensed the familiar aura, he stepped aside without hesitation, leaving the players to deal with this problem themselves. For starters, he decided to stay back and observe. The darkness ahead began to stir, and soon a giant silhouette emerged from it. The guardian of the level, a skeletal dragon, appeared before everyone. His appearance was accompanied by a heavy grinding sound, as if time itself was losing stability under the weight of his bony wings. The monster's eyes glowed with a deathly blue fire, and their light penetrated souls, awakening animal fear. The players rushed forward. At first, the attacks rained down in a continuous hail. Blade strikes, spell flashes, arrows, and spears. But all of this was shattered against the almost impenetrable defense. The dragon's bones rang, but did not give in, and each attack seemed insignificant. The attackers fell one after another, and soon the ground beneath their feet was strewn with bodies and broken weapons. The second stage of the battle began. The dragon slowly spread his ribs, as if opening his chest to his enemies. A heart glowed inside, encased in a vortex of blue flame. It beat in time with the dungeon, as if it were its core. Adisalai knew that this was the moment when the creature was vulnerable. This was the moment to strike the decisive blow. But reaching the heart was almost impossible. Anyone who tried to rush forward was faced with a stream of deadly breath. Flames bursting from the monster's mouth burned the bodies to ashes, leaving no traces of ash. Players, one after another, fell dead. Panic was setting in. Andrea watched with confusion. She hadn't prepared for this. She understood that every mistake cost lives, and her indecision could destroy everyone. While her companions sank into despair, Adisalai remained unusually calm. There was no fear or pity for the perishing in his gaze. He perceived everything that was happening as a pattern, as part of the picture that he had already built in his mind. Internally, he was preparing for the next step, waiting for the moment when someone else's strength and someone else's mistakes would play into his hands. Adisalai had encountered similar creatures before and knew that the dragon had a strict sequence of attacks. The first stage is the fire breath. The second is the opening of the heart and a trap for those who dare to approach. This is when the decisive blow must be delivered. Ignoring Andrea's cries, he stepped forward. The flames burned his skin, the air trembled with heat, but Adisalai moved with precision and confidence. The next moment, his blade pierced the dragon's heart. The monster roared, collapsing the ceiling of the cave and crumbling into dust. The system rewarded him with experience and the right to claim the dungeon for himself. An angry grimace appeared on Andrea's face. The stranger intercepted her prey. She cast a spell on Zhou Qing and ordered her men to kill the rest of the players, hoping to unlock the secret mission through mass murder. When the dust settled, Andrea noticed movement. The boy was alive. Her spell hadn't destroyed him, even though it should have. She scanned it with her eyes and found a strange discrepancy. The system was only showing level 5, too little for the one who managed to resist. Suspicion burned her mind. The girl ordered to seize him. One of the warriors rushed forward, but Adisalai raised his hand and lightning struck the enemy, paralyzing the body. He easily finished him off with a blow from his blade and received new experience points, this time for killing a player. The crowd gasped. For the first time, Andrea doubted her own conclusions. This guy wasn't who he seemed. His power was beyond measure. She felt that she had made a serious mistake, and for the first time she thought, perhaps a future battle mage stood before her. Andrea quickly assessed the situation and realized that her group's strength was beginning to weaken. To prevent the enemy from turning the battle into a protracted standoff, she gave her men the order to act together and attack in a coordinated manner. However, Adisalai clearly realized that he could not withstand the pressure of several experienced opponents alone. His own capabilities were running out. At this critical moment, he decided to take the extreme and activated the ability that he had previously saved for exceptional circumstances, summoning the undead. As the players rapidly approached, believing that just a little more and the enemy would be defeated, their path was suddenly blocked by a familiar figure. Creatures that they had already defeated before appeared before them. This came as a complete surprise to Andrea. She couldn't understand how dead enemies were standing in the way again. It seemed that the dungeon itself was restoring the destroyed monsters, but upon closer inspection, the girl noticed that the revived creatures were beginning to gather around Zhou Qing, as if obeying his will. Then she realized that this guy was the one controlling them, and that a simple attack would no longer bring results. After assessing the forces, Andrea realized that the chances of winning were minimal. She had only one hidden trump card left at her disposal, an artifact that she carefully saved for the final battle with the dungeon boss. It was a bone flute, endowed with special magical power, a rare and powerful item. Before going into the dungeon, the guild leader himself gave it to her, and it was to be used only in the most desperate circumstances. Realizing that there was no other way out, Andrea decided to activate the artifact. As soon as the ominous sound of the pipe sounded in the air, the earth shook. From the darkness emerged the King of Beasts, a gigantic monster that inspired terror in even the most steadfast warriors. Andrea was convinced that no one could stop such a creature, much less a lone player whose strength, it seemed to her, was running out. However, Adisalai showed no fear. He knew that his powers were not limited to just controlling the small undead that his enemies saw around him. Deep down, he knew that he was capable of controlling more powerful beings when the time was right. It was then that Andrea witnessed a truly terrifying sight. The bone dragon they had fought earlier, and which they believed had been finally defeated, had come to life. The monster rose from the ground, and his gaze was directed straight at her. The girl finally understood that victory was impossible. In the face of inevitable death, she tried to explain that she had ended up in this place not of her own free will, but on the orders of the head of the Bloodline Guild, Stoker. It was he who sent her here to obtain unique equipment hidden in the depths of the dungeon. For this purpose, Stoker was ready to make any sacrifice. Andrea hoped that the threat of retribution would force Adisalai to abandon the idea of killing her, since the death of an ally of the head of such a powerful guild would inevitably lead to bloody revenge. But the words had no meaning. Adisalai remained unmoved. He gave the order to his bone dragon to destroy his opponent without hesitation. Soon Andrea's body was burned to ashes by blue flames. With her death, the system rewarded Adisalai with a new level. He reached rank 10, which further strengthened his capabilities. However, the peace did not last long. Deep in the dungeon, something changed. The system notified players that a hidden dungeon level had been activated. The condition for its opening was the destruction of a sufficient number of enemies, and now this threshold has been passed. At the same time, the system warned of a serious danger awaiting inside. Adisalai read the message carefully, but only chuckled. He understood that even the system itself did not know the whole truth. For most players, the danger was in the monsters and traps. But Adisalai knew full well that the most terrifying creature here was himself. He thought about his gear for a moment. There were dozens of items scattered around, left behind by dead hunters. Once upon a time, these players eagerly collected loot from defeated monsters, and now it was time for him to take their property for himself. Adisalai ordered the undead to gather everything of value. The bony hands of the skeletons picked up swords, daggers, rings, and pieces of armor, laying them before their master. After putting on the armor, he suddenly noticed that the system had a special function: equipment transformation. Thanks to it, the true origin of objects could be determined. Now, no one will guess that he plundered fallen players and dressed in their treasures. In addition, he got access to a personal warehouse where he could transfer the items he found. This feature was extremely convenient. Now he could collect everything without restrictions, without worrying about the weight or volume of the inventory. Equipped and clad in armor, Adisalai moved forward, his step firm and confident. The gates to a new, extremely dangerous dungeon opened before him. He walked inside and was immediately met by two massive guards who were guarding the huge door. The huge figures stood frozen on either side of the room, like silent statues. But as soon as he crossed the line, their eyes began to glow with a dim stone light. The castle seemed strangely familiar. There was something familiar about the walls and arches, as if he had been here before. His thoughts began to whirl. Could it really be that this place had once belonged to his domain? Perhaps part of the ancient castle had indeed been turned into a dungeon by the system. He quickly noticed something else. The summoning of the undead did not work here. The connection with the resurrected creatures was broken, and the surroundings became eerily empty. Adisalai gritted his teeth and looked at the nearest guard. Activating the analysis ability, he got the result. Stone Guardian. Golem. Level 40. Adisalai quickly realized that he had entered a place where there was no mercy even for the strongest. The guards at the entrance were 30 levels higher than him, which was quite expected for such a dungeon. However, instead of attacking, they bowed down, as if recognizing his power. The guy frowned. Was this a clever trap or a special condition of the test? But in the end, he cast aside his doubts. He had not known fear for a long time, and so he stepped forward with firm determination. The most important thing now was to take possession of this dungeon and obtain the rarest equipment. As soon as he entered, the shadows began to stir and new enemies attacked him. They were the undead. Adisalaya was amused by this fact, as if fate itself had decided to test him with those opponents whom he hated and knew best. It was a gift to him. A smile spread across his face, and the weapon in his hands flashed with a deadly light. The undead did not understand why their enemy was smiling, but the answer was simple. He was a specialist in exterminating their race. The fight was fast. Adisalai moved with lightning speed. Every blow was precise. Every movement was measured. Experience points poured in at an incredible speed, as if the system itself was rewarding him for his bloody dance. He felt like his skills were working perfectly. No enemy could even get close enough to him to do the slightest bit of damage. But inside, the guy felt not only excitement, but also a slight disappointment. He expected that the secret dungeon would be much more difficult. Yes, the enemies were strong, but not strong enough to force him to really give it his all. It all seemed like a warm-up, preparation for the real test. However, he did not forget that the further, the more dangerous. And if the guards were level 40, then who knows what awaits him in the heart of the castle. When the last undead was defeated, the system generously rewarded him with conqueror points. And he chose the fireball almost without thinking. Soon his path led to a massive door, whose leaves were covered with ancient symbols, and from the cracks came a thick, almost tangible breath of darkness. It radiated such ancient magic that the darkness itself seemed to move in the air, viscous and sticky. The heart of the dungeon. The very depths where the main guardian of this place lived. But curiosity and anticipation wove inside, fueling his excitement. His fingers touched the cold stone and he pushed the door resolutely, and then he stepped inside. The hall was empty at first glance. Instincts told me that behind this barrier there was an enemy waiting, against whom simple strength or agility would not help. No monsters, no traps, just an oppressive silence, as if the stone itself was holding its breath. But the center of the room immediately attracted attention. A giant magic circle was spread out on the floor, inscribed with intricate lines and symbols. Their weaving formed a complex pattern that could not be confused with any other. He had seen something like this before, a seal of awakening created to contain an ancient evil. It required blood to activate. Adisalai frowned. The thought of retreating flashed through his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Once he had reached this point, it was too late to stop. A light prick, and a drop of blood fell on the symbol depicted on the stone. At that very moment, the circle flared up with a bright scarlet light, like an awakened fire, and a low, vibrating echo spread throughout the hall. The air became heavier, the walls began to shake, and a stream of power burst out from the floor itself, which could be felt even by the skin. He remembered who he was going to awaken. The name of this creature had long been a legend among those who dared to discuss the depths of the dungeons. Selena is a powerful vampire whose strength was considered so monstrous that even senior players whispered her name. She was someone who could not be disturbed, and that was why there was a seal here. But curiosity and a thirst for testing proved stronger than common sense. The scarlet glow broke, and a silhouette appeared in the hall. A tall figure materialized from the fog, and a cold aura immediately filled the space. Selena was furious that she was woken up before her time. Even the stone walls seemed to crack from her presence. The hero understood perfectly well that he was inferior to her in strength, that there was a gaping abyss between them. Yet curiosity was piqued within him. He was eager to test the capabilities of his new body against such a formidable opponent. The legendary level 40 boss stood before him, a challenge that was both enticing and terrifying. The fight broke out quickly, Selena moving so fast that her movements merged with the streams of fog. Each of her attacks was furious and crushing, causing the stone floor to crack under the impact. Her hands and blades, created from clots of bloody energy, struck mercilessly. Adisalai tried to resist, responding with lunges, rolls, and magical blows. But it soon became obvious that his strength was clearly not enough. Each impact showed how much stronger she was. He felt the blows in his bones. His breathing was ragged. His muscles ached from the strain. Any mistake could cost him his life. And yet, he stubbornly continued to hold on, wanting to at least for a moment come closer to understanding how great the power of the vampire he had awakened was. Each of her attacks proved how big the difference in level was between them. He knew he couldn't defeat her. As Selena approached her opponent, her insides were filled with a primal desire to drink fresh blood. She had been asleep for decades. The thirst that had been building up for all that time now pushed her forward, demanding immediate release. Her eyes shone with a dark hunger. Her movements became sharp and rapid, as if her body itself was obeying the calling instinct. Leaning towards Adisalai, she sank her sharp fangs into his neck. Warm blood gushed out, and the first sip brought relief, almost euphoria. But at the same time, the taste was different from what she expected. Along with the scarlet stream, images that did not belong to her poured into her consciousness. Images of someone else's past flashed before her eyes. With each passing moment, she realized the truth more clearly. The one standing before her was not just a random mortal, but her master. This insight hit her harder than any spell or weapon. In an instant, all her rage, pent-up anger, and thirst for revenge dissipated. Instead of the usual pride and cold hatred, a different feeling flared up in her heart. Submission and reverence for the one she considered lost forever. Her strength left her, and, as if acknowledging the greatness of the revealed truth, she fell to her knees. Adisalai, too, was shaken. The taste of the bite, the touch of memories, and the awakened magic of the dungeon stirred up his own shadows of the past. Now he understood why the guards did not block his path and allowed him to pass unhindered into the heart of the dungeon. It all made too much sense. He was the creator of this place. Pictures of his past life appeared before his inner eye. He remembered the old vows he had made to Selena. Once, many years ago, he had promised to meet her again after a long separation, and then bind their destinies together in marriage. Those words were spoken more out of necessity than sincere confession. In her past life, Selena had followed him relentlessly. She gave him no peace. Her attention was persistent and at times intrusive. Passion burned in her eyes, turning into obsession. In order to maintain the alliance with the vampire clan and prevent a split, Adhisalai had to come to terms with her presence and allow her to be near. But deep down he knew that he had no real feelings for her. Her love seemed burdensome. Now, Selena saw it for herself. Having witnessed his memories, she knew the truth. She knew that he did not love her. But still her feelings did not fade. She continued to reach out to him, despite his coldness and detachment. Moreover, realizing that in his memories people were guilty of his death, she expressed her willingness to help him deal with them in the future. The conversation moved on to something else. Adisalai inquired about the special equipment that was supposed to be stored in these depths. However, Selena replied that there were no weapons or artifacts here except for one item. She brought the dowry that she had once prepared for their meeting. This was an unusual garment. Not only did it enhance the owner's abilities, but it also had a rare feature. It could be improved and developed. After trying on the new robes, Adisalai felt the power within him increase. In his hands was not only high-level equipment, but also an ally of incredible value. Selena, the level 40 boss, now submitted to him and became his faithful companion. Realizing that the test was over, Adisalai decided to leave the dungeon. Together, they tried to get out, but the vampire could not leave the walls of her confinement. Remembering the details of the past, he realized that it was he himself who once cast a special spell that kept her inside. It could only be destroyed with one's own weapon, and that weapon was now in the possession of the player who killed it. Convinced that it was now impossible for him to help Selena, Adisalai promised her that he would definitely return and free her. After that, he activated the passage and stepped back into the human world. On the surface, many players were waiting for him, all watching with curiosity the appearance of the one who dared to leave the dangerous dungeon. A man immediately approached him, clearly wanting to find out something about what had happened. He reported that their entire group had perished in the depths of the dungeon. They had been attacked by an incredibly strong enemy, and they had been left helpless. As a result, almost everyone was killed, and only he miraculously survived. However, there was another person in the crowd who did not believe his story. Adisalai realized that these players had deliberately sent assassins into the dungeon to obtain rare equipment. At that moment, when the tension between the parties was growing, the leader of the detachment, a young guy named Stoker, intervened in the dispute. He spoke more restrainedly than his subordinates, apologized for their harshness, and stressed that none of his people intended to create problems for Adisalaya. However, their words were at odds with their facial expressions and hidden glances. Their behavior was filled with discontent and inner tension, and it was obvious that they were not going to back down so easily. Stoker made it clear to his allies that they needed to gather more information about the mysterious newcomer as quickly as possible. Any threat from him must be eliminated without unnecessary noise. This hidden determination made him even more dangerous in the eyes of Adisalai. Deep down, he immediately sensed the danger emanating from this man upon meeting him. Stoker's youth was deceptive. Behind his gaze lurked strength, cunning, and composure, which made him an extremely difficult opponent in the future. Fighting against such an enemy could turn into a real test, requiring extreme caution and thoughtfulness in every step. Shortly after, the general manager of the Players' Union approached him. His attention was focused on checking Adisalaya's level. Seeing the mark of only level 10, he couldn't hide his surprise. It remained a mystery to everyone present how such a seemingly weak newcomer managed to survive in one of the deadliest dungeons. This was contrary to logic and experience, as such places rarely left a chance even for experienced warriors. Curiosity about Adhisalai's personality only grew, but he himself clearly understood. If the people around him knew the truth that it was he who single-handedly destroyed all the enemies inside, their reaction would not just be surprise, but real shock. The hidden power he inherited could cause fear and hostility. The general manager, meanwhile, reminded them of an important rule. Everything that happened inside the dungeons was not subject to the laws and rules of the outside world. There were different laws there, and everything that was done inside remained outside the official norms. After these words, he handed Adhisalai a special card. It was a symbol of admission to new trials and opened up the possibility of repeated visits to places where completely different rules were in effect. For Adhisalai, this was a valuable opportunity. The way was now open for him to continue his path of strength, unfettered by the limitations of the outside world. And at that very moment he remembered the last will of the previous owner of the body he now inhabited. Thoughts about the promise and duty he had given surfaced in his memory and acquired a special clarity. He was determined to fulfill this legacy, realizing that fulfilling someone else's will had now become his own duty. The dead boy had a younger sister, and now he considered it his duty to help her. As he headed towards their house, he heard noise and shouts coming from far away. They tried to evict the girl for non-payment of rent and take the house by force. Entering inside, Adisalai saw a room full of rough men. He began to slowly count out loud, which caused confusion among those present. No one understood why he was doing this. Only Adhisalai himself knew the true reason. He was calculating the amount of experience points he could get for each of them. Adisalai easily dealt with the raiders who tried to evict the girl. He stood before the defeated men who, having lost all dignity, begged in despair for their lives. Their trembling voices and depressed appearance clearly indicated that they were no longer able to resist. At that moment, he turned his gaze to the sister of the deceased owner of the body. It was important for him to hear her decision, because she was the one who suffered the most from their actions. The girl, despite her young age and the bitterness of loss, showed unexpected firmness. She said that it was not worth killing these people it was better to give them a chance to improve. She believed that even those who had done evil could change if they were allowed to start over. This decision surprised Adisalai, but he submitted to her will. He let the defeated go, although deep down he knew that it would be much simpler and more reliable to get rid of them once and for all. However, the mercy shown did not mean a refusal to reckon. He had already begun to think about how to use their weakness and fear for his own purposes. His attention was immediately drawn to one man among the fallen. His behavior suggested a cunning and enterprise that the others lacked. Adisalai quickly realized that this was the guy who could be of use to him. Without wasting any time, he asked him a direct question. Did he know how to trade on the black market? The answer came with confidence and without hesitation. The guy admitted that he had a lot of experience and connections in this area, and this is where he is really strong. Then Adisalai took out some of the trophies obtained in the dungeon and handed them over to his new ally. The reaction was immediate. He was confused. After all, before that, everyone was convinced that the newcomer had returned from the depths empty-handed. The rumors that he had failed to obtain anything seemed convincing, and now the truth was revealed to be completely different. Calmly and coolly, Adisalai explained that he had many more such valuables. If the boy could keep his secret and cooperate honestly, he could earn a good amount of money. To begin with, he gave him a simple but important task: to sell the things he received and use the proceeds to pay off the girl's housing debt. The guy assured that after payment, there would still be a lot of money left, and he would definitely return the remainder to the owner. After these events, having put his sister to bed, Adisalai thought about the fate of his former relatives. Were they alive? What happened to them? But there was no time to think. It was necessary to implement his own plan. Now, after leaving the dungeon, all the monsters that remained under his control could level up on their own, and he himself received the unique to recover even after death. This gave him a huge advantage. If someone dared to go against him again, he would not leave anyone a second chance at life. The next morning, like a loving brother, he prepared breakfast for his sister. The girl was surprised to notice that he had clearly forgotten how to cook, although in reality, Adisalai had never done anything like that before. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. The same merchant returned and reported that all the treasures given to him had been sold. He handed Adisalai a card with an impressive amount of money on the balance. The girl screamed with joy, because this money was enough not only to pay off debts, but also for a comfortable life for a long time to come. Adisalai realized that this man could become a reliable tool for him. He offered him to work for him. The merchant immediately accepted his offer. He felt the power and danger that emanated from this guy. Then Adisalai ordered him to look after the house and take care of his sister, knowing that this man, although a villain by nature, would not betray him due to his greed. Having made sure that the girl was safe, he left her in the care of the new servant and went to look for a task for himself. But there was a new problem waiting for him. None of the players wanted to take him into the team. Some considered him too low-level, others not strong enough. The refusals poured in one after another. And suddenly, representatives of a certain guild approached him and said that they needed just one more player. They approached Adisalai with an offer to join them and become part of their powerful group. At first glance, this seemed like a stroke of luck, and he agreed, happy that he would finally be able to return to the dungeons. But Stoker's men were watching him closely in the shadows. They were the ones who sent this team to him. Stoker understood perfectly well that if the guy was lured into the dungeon, it would be easy to kill him there and take the treasures he had obtained. As he approached the appointed place, Adisalai became increasingly wary. The warriors he was now walking with looked suspicious, and the dungeon they had chosen seemed too easy for their level. But soon he realized the true reason for what was happening around him. He was in a dungeon called Fishman Harbor, which was considered one of the most dangerous locations for mid-level players. Only those whose rank ranged from level 10 to level 25 had access there. The place was full of traps, hidden passages, and dangerous creatures. and the goal of the entire expedition was to destroy a powerful boss guarding the deep treasures. It was for these riches and experiences that many sought to get there, despite the mortal risk. Now it became clear why the unknown adventurers and their companions chose this particular dungeon. The wealth and power that were hidden behind the gates of the harbor were much more enticing than the fear of death. The team, which included Adisalai, received a new assignment. His conditions were extremely clear. Among all the many targets and opponents, special attention had to be paid to protecting the young priestess. This girl possessed a rare and valuable gift: true healing, capable of restoring strength and even saving from fatal wounds. She was the heart of the squad, and without her support, any encounter with numerous monsters could end in tragedy. That's why her safety was put above the lives of others. Every step was taken with an eye on her. Every maneuver was designed to protect her from direct threat. However, the group's progress was soon stopped. The first guardians of this dungeon appeared before them, the Fishmen. Their appearance was unexpected. From different sides, from the water and dark passages, dozens of creatures with scaly skin, fins, and sharp spears emerged. What was supposed to be a normal fight with a scouting party of monsters quickly escalated into a fierce battle. There were too many enemies, and they attacked in waves, like an endless stream from the depths. The air was filled with the clanging of metal and magical flashes. The players' screams merged with the growls and hisses of the fishmen. The walls of the dungeon shook from the blows of spells and furious clashes. One of the adventurers fell, pierced by a spear. Another managed to rise only thanks to the healing light of the priestess. She clenched her teeth and cast spells, ignoring her fatigue and fear, because the fate of the entire group lay on her shoulders. Adisalai watched the proceedings and knew that he was expected to participate. But interfering put him in a difficult position. His power was too unusual. He knew full well that revealing all his abilities now would arouse suspicion, and that could not be allowed. Every step he took, every manifestation of his actions, could give his observant allies a clue as to his true nature and goals. So he chose the path of caution. Instead of unleashing his full power on his enemies, he allowed himself to use only a part of it: the warrior's battle cry. A wave of strength rolled through the bodies of his comrades, filling them with courage and determination. He himself, having moved closer to the enemy lines, rushed into the attack. His strikes were swift and deadly, sending several fishmen crashing down before they even knew what they were dealing with. But this was only the beginning. Far more dangerous trials lay ahead, and Adisalai clearly sensed that it would become increasingly difficult to restrain himself. During the battle, an unpleasant incident occurred. He was almost hit by an attack launched by his allies. Its source turned out to be a female mage who acted in a hurry. The spell almost hit him, and she immediately tried to justify it, explaining that it happened by accident. Adisalai caught the confusion in her gaze, but he realized that it was not that simple. It became clear to him: the girl and another player, a samurai, were not sent here by chance. Stoker's name came to mind. He had hoped that in the depths of the dungeon, these two would be the ones to bring about his death. After the battle was over, the commander assessed the detachment's actions. He noted that everyone had done quite well, and ordered them to move on. Gradually they approached the main goal: the boss's room. The atmosphere was thickening, the tension was rising, but Adisalai could see that the others were taking the situation too lightly. They did not understand the threat they were facing. He prepared a couple of his abilities in advance, realizing that he couldn't do without them. And it was at that moment that something happened that he had expected but did not want to admit. He was suddenly attacked by his own allies. A torrent of blows and spells rained down on him, and he found himself at the center of a treacherous attack. The girl mage looked at all this in complete bewilderment. It seemed that she did not understand why her own people turned their weapons against a member of the squad. When she tried to say something, the traitors made it clear that if she wanted to live, she had to remain silent. With these words, they completed their plan. However, their actions had an unpredictable result. A sudden noise and bangs woke up the dungeon master. A giant level 20 deep sea catfish appeared from the darkness. Its size was terrifying, and its fury knew no bounds. The monster rushed towards the players, and it seemed as if the earth itself was shaking under its heavy body. The traitors glanced at Adisalai's body. He lay motionless, and they decided that he was finished. It didn't matter much to them. Their plan was for the huge catfish to devour his remains, hiding the traces of their hands. Everything was working in their favor. They could leave and let the monster deal with the rest. But it was at this moment that something happened that they least expected. As the players were about to leave the room, a voice rang out. It was firm, full of contempt and power. Adisalai rose from the ground, his figure towering against the flickering torchlight, his eyes blazing with cold determination. He addressed those present, declaring that none of them would leave here alive. At this point, Stoker was discussing with his man whether the girl could be trusted to carry out the task. The conspirators continued to discuss their plan. They were confident that the power of the mysterious girl among their allies would be enough to destroy Adisalai. They were convinced that her gift would allow them to turn the tide of battle and suppress the one who was becoming too dangerous for their plans. While the plots were being woven and roles assigned in the shadows, Adisalai himself was already preparing for the upcoming battle. When the battle began, an avalanche of opponents fell upon him. The players attacked from several directions at once, trying to surround him and make him waver under the pressure of numerical superiority. Their blows followed one after another, but no matter how hard they tried, the weapons caused him almost no noticeable harm. Every movement of Adisalai was honed. Every action had the precision of a fighting instinct. Adisalai easily parried the blows, parried the attacks, and responded with his own swift attacks. His enemies fell one after another, struck down by blows that should have left them weak. He inflicted significant wounds, cut through flesh, broke through defenses, but the opponents, contrary to common sense, did not stop. Even after receiving fatal injuries, they rose again and continued to advance, as if not noticing the pain and death. This was alarming. The tenacity and senseless resilience of these people was not like an ordinary battle. At first, Adisalai thought it was a manifestation of mad fanaticism or a special temperament of the fighters. But gradually he perceived a different pattern in what was happening. Their movements seemed mechanical, and there was no conscious expression in their gaze. They acted with a cold consistency that resembled the control of puppets rather than the free will of living people. It was then that a hunch flashed through his mind. They were under hypnosis. Such a skill could not be a common ability of a random fighter. Only the one Stoker spoke of could have mastered such art. The mysterious girl with the gift of subjugating someone else's will. Although she herself was not yet visible on the battlefield, her presence was almost physical. Adisalai felt an unknown pressure hanging over him. There was a strange tension in his chest, as if the breath of an alien force was penetrating his consciousness. Even when his eyes did not see the figure of the enemy, his inner sense told him that it was nearby. She seemed to be hiding in the shadows, watching him, waiting for the right moment to deliver the decisive blow. This feeling never left him, as if there was always an invisible figure standing behind him, ready to unleash its power at any moment. And suddenly, everything changed. The illusion that had been hiding her dissipated like a thick curtain of fog, and a girl appeared before Adisalai. She stepped out of the shadows, the weapon glinting in her hands, catching the faint glimmer of the surrounding light. The cold blade pressed directly into his neck, leaving a thin but noticeable line of pressure on his skin. At that moment, Adisalai finally realized the truth. It was she who had been controlling the players all this time, forcing them to continue fighting even after fatal blows. It was she who held their minds captive and tried to subjugate not only them, but him as well. Now the danger was revealed in full force. Before him stood not just an enemy, but a skilled puppeteer whose will could turn the strongest warriors into mindless slaves. She did not hide the fact that she initially intended to destroy him with the hands of others, turning the fighters into an instrument of her will. Her plan was designed so that only the samurai would witness it, and the outcome of the battle would seem natural. But now that the plan had failed, she had to try to finish what she had started herself. However, she was unable to exploit her success. Suddenly, a weapon rushed towards her, piercing the space between her and Adisalai. Samurai, who until that moment everyone considered an ally of the players, intervened in the battle. His actions clearly showed that he had nothing in common with the conspirators. Adisalai watched the newcomer to the battle warily. He sensed that behind the mask and heavy armor was not who they thought he was. His persistence led to the question, who is really standing in front of him? The samurai did not deny the obvious. To prove his point, he removed his armor, revealing his true identity. Under the glitter of armor was a girl, Miyamoto. She had been hiding all this time, but now her appearance was revealed. Her level was significantly higher than expected, 80, and her class belonged to the Sword Master category. Adisalai understood perfectly well that Miyamoto's words about betrayal were not an empty threat. In her cold gaze and determination, one could feel the readiness to fulfill her promise at any second. But he remained calm and unperturbed, confident that he knew how to stop her from taking such a hasty step. He reminded the girl that there was no reason to kill him, because only he was capable of giving her what she came here for. His words made her think. The internal tension eased a little, and for the first time in a long time, her voice sounded not threatening but interested. She asked how he knew about her desire and what exactly she was looking for in this place. Adisalai, however, said without a shadow of a doubt that the purpose of her journey was the sword. Hearing this, Miyamoto did not hide her surprise. She could not understand how this guy had guessed about something that was carefully hidden. But he went further and stated that it was in this dungeon that he hid the very blade whose name sounded like Hidekill. These words shocked her. Miyamoto confessed that Hidekill's sword was the key to her awakening, the final step to a new level of power. She explained that there was a special system in which a player, upon reaching level 80, was able to receive a class awakening. Only a few people managed to do something like this, and only 7 such heroes were known in the entire world. They were called the 7 Greats, and each of them was considered a living legend. She was only one step away from joining their ranks, and now her fate depended on the sword. There was genuine determination in her voice, and she said bluntly that if Adisalai helped her achieve her goal, she would be indebted to him for everything and would fulfill his every wish. For her, it was a serious promise, and for him, it was another tool that could help him achieve his goal. Adisalai did not bargain. He only said briefly, "Follow him." Without wasting any time, he slipped into the cold water and swam deeper into the cave. Miyamoto followed him, and soon they emerged in a hall where at the bottom, among gold coins and precious stones, a whole mountain of treasures towered. At that moment, Miyamoto felt a tremor. She asked if the sword she was looking for was really here. The guy confidently replied that this is where he hid it. Years passed, but everything remained untouched. His hand confidently pushed aside the glittering piles, and soon he pulled out a sword from the pile of riches. Adisalai did not keep it, but immediately threw it to the girl. The double devil blade flashed, reflecting the light, as if awakening darkness and power. Her order was completed. Her eyes lit up with admiration, as if she was holding not just a weapon in her hands, but the embodiment of her dreams and hopes. But the joy did not last long. At that moment, Adisalai remembered one important circumstance. He had left a guard near the sword, and if his calculations were correct, the guard was still there. The doubts were instantly dispelled. A gigantic figure emerged from the depths, the king of the fishmen, a level 40 monster. His scales glittered in the water's reflections, and his movements conveyed a power beyond that of a normal opponent. Adisalai immediately realized that it would be extremely difficult for him to defeat such an enemy. The monster's strength far exceeded his own capabilities, and his mind told him to retreat. But Adesalai's character never allowed him to give in to difficulties. He tried to shift the task to Miyamoto, reminding her that now it was her turn to prove her strength. But the thought was cut short when he remembered. The girl was under hypnosis. To master the sword and its power, she had to overcome an internal barrier and fight with herself. Until this happened, it was impossible to count on her help. There was no way out. He realized that he had to stand up to the Sea King himself. His mind soberly assessed the complexity of the situation, but fear did not take hold of him. He felt that fate was testing his strength again. The task was almost hopeless, but such trials were always familiar to him. And if he ever chose the path forward, he did it to the end, no matter the cost. Adesalai couldn't break through the boss's armor, and he realized that he was facing a truly strong opponent. The level was everything. It was time to reveal hidden abilities. In the fight, he used one of his moves, a soul-grabbing claw, but the enemy managed to dodge it. The monster's blows came one after another, and Adesalai could hardly withstand the onslaught. Realizing that his current strength was not enough, he decided to use his main trump card, the Flame of the Skeleton Destroyer. Setting it to full power, he released a powerful stream of fire, hoping that the enemy would be destroyed. But the sudden attack was unexpectedly reflected back, knocking him down with force and causing him to lose his balance. The monster loomed over him, and it became clear that he had completely hidden his aura in advance, concealing his true power. Now death was very close. The monster's weapon was ready to fall upon him. Meanwhile, in the burial fields, a group of players decided to try their luck. They rushed after the treasure, confident that victory over the boss was near and that untold riches awaited them ahead. But it was there that they all died, from the incinerating flames of the skeletal dragon. The system immediately notified Adesalai that he had received experience for the death of players. This allowed him to withstand the blow, rise, and even advance to level 15. All his wounds instantly healed. Now the second round of the fight with the monster was coming. Adesalai continued to wage a fierce battle with the monster, putting all his strength and skill into trying to break through its armor. However, no matter how many blows he dealt, the armor remained impenetrable, as if it was created to absorb any attack. And just when the tension reached its limit, the system suddenly told him terrible news. The enemy's forces had tripled. The boss entered a state of wrath. Now, every swing of his claws or blow could be fatal. Adesalai understood that his situation was hopeless, and deep down, he was already preparing for the worst. But just when despair was about to cloud his mind, everything changed. The shining blade cut through the air, and a single blow took the monster's life. It was Miyamoto. Like an angel emerging from the darkness, she unleashed her power on the monster and brought it down. However, the girl immediately said that she did not kill the enemy completely. As a token of gratitude for Adesalai not abandoning her in that damned dungeon, she decided to let him deal the finishing blow. The boy knew very well that such opportunities were rare, and the fact that Miyamoto shared this moment with him was a true sign of respect. Gathering his strength, he delivered the final blow, ending the battle. The system responded instantly. Adesalai received experience points for destroying the level 40 boss. But that wasn't all. A message popped up in the interface saying that a special quest had been unlocked: the Devil's Trial. In addition, as a special reward, he received a rare resource: the Scale of the Fishman, an epic-level item whose purpose he did not yet know. Thoughts about the new task and the unusual reward did not give him peace, but he decided to deal with it after he left the dungeon. At the moment, the most important thing was to survive and reach the exit. Together with Miyamoto, they rushed there, and on the way, his gaze opened up to piles of treasures hidden in the depths of the dungeon. He understood that all this could bring untold wealth, but he did not stop. It was more important to save strength and bring to the surface what they had already received. Just before leaving, Miyamoto unexpectedly threw him a small badge. She explained that this sign could be presented at her house, and then the security would let him inside. If Adisalai ever needed help, he could turn to her. But the girl asked him to keep her identity a secret. When they came outside, everyone present was in complete shock to see them alive. Few believed that anyone would be able to leave this dungeon, and the appearance of Adisalai along with Miyamoto was an unexpected and frightening event. Among the crowd, he noticed one of Stoker's subordinates and immediately approached him. There was steel in his voice as he told them to tell the master that he would be the last person he would ever see. The words were cold, but the aura emanating from Adisalai was even more frightening. The man who was threatened felt a chill go down his spine. Although the words were directed not at him, but at his master, the fear of the young man was stronger than even what he had ever felt for Stoker himself. Meanwhile, the only survivor from the Burial Fields dungeon begged to be released. He tried to justify himself to Stoker, explaining that this place was anomalous, and they simply had no chance. But these words did not bother anyone. The main hope was that at least Zhou Qing died. However, suddenly the phone rang. Stoker picked it up, his face contorted with anger when he heard the news. Zhou Qin survived. This news was reported by a man who also allowed himself to give advice. Do not get involved with this young man. Moreover, he directly stated that he was quitting and no longer intended to work for Stoker. In a rage, blinded by powerlessness and humiliation, Stoker took out his anger on the player who was next to him and killed him. However, deep in his eyes, there was a burning desire for revenge. He asked his subordinate if Zhou Qing had a sister. He confirmed that the young man really did have a younger sister. Stoker immediately gave the order to bring her immediately. Adisalai increasingly realized that the conflict with Stoker could not be postponed for long. Stoker had already caused a lot of trouble, and every delay only made the situation more difficult. The young man's thoughts also wandered to his sister, Xiao. He wondered if she missed him, if she felt his absence. As he approached the house where she was supposed to be, he encountered an unexpected sight. A group of men had gathered in front of the entrance, clearly waiting for his appearance. The man who was entrusted with taking care of Xiao lay helplessly on a pile of rocks, wounded and exhausted. Raising his head with difficulty, he admitted that he had failed to protect the girl. There were too many attackers, and his strength was not enough to deal with them all. There was remorse and bitterness of defeat in his voice. The enemies surrounding Adisalai studied him with interest, trying to determine the level of his training. From their looks, he realized that they knew who was in front of them, and were sure that this was the young man who needed to be delivered to Stoker. However, Adisalai himself did not consider it necessary to waste time and energy on them. Calmly but decisively, he declared that he did not need such a large escort. With one lightning-fast movement of his sword, he broke through the enemy lines, destroying almost all of them. He left only one alive, grabbing him by the collar. The weak and wounded ally who was supposed to be guarding Xiao struggled to find words, asking for forgiveness for his weakness. His devotion and sincere repentance touched Adisalai. He did not expect such steadfastness from this man. Having expressed his gratitude with restraint, the young man said that his path now lay behind his sister, but there was an assignment for his subordinate that needed to be completed. Moving further, he came out into an alley where new opponents were already waiting for him. As if to signal, he threw the body of one of Stoker's men in there, demonstrating that his anger could not be ignored. The crowd that had gathered around immediately realized that before them was the very young man for whom a generous reward had been appointed. Greed flared in their eyes and they rushed into battle, wanting to get the reward for his capture. However, the fight turned into a massacre for them. Adisalai moved swiftly and mercilessly, turning the battle into a one-sided extermination. One after another, the enemies fell under his blows, and soon the street was filled with silence, broken only by the ringing of steel and the groans of the dying. Anyone who dared to raise a weapon was destroyed almost instantly. Having finished the massacre, he looked up. Stoker himself stood on the roof of the house in the company of his assistant. He watched what was happening with a cold expression on his face, assessing the strength of the young man. It was obvious that Adisalai had no trouble dealing with the scum that was sent to meet him. A thought flashed through Stoker's mind about the level of power he possessed. His movements and confidence betrayed him as a battle mage. Stoker, however, remained calm. Even if Adhisalai was a dangerous opponent, he did not pose a real threat. The reason was simple. They had Xiao in their hands. Stoker sent Eric to fight against Adhisalai. Eric's combat class was Beast, and he had already reached level 25. Eric was sure that his opponent didn't have the slightest chance. But Adhisalai thought differently, and showed no concern at all about the upcoming battle. He easily parried his opponent's blows, which only irritated Eric even more. It seemed unbearable to Tom that the guy wasn't even nervous, behaving as if the outcome of the battle had already been decided. Then Eric resorted to the capabilities of his level, increasing his own agility and strength. But this attack was also repelled without difficulty. Eventually, Adhisalai grabbed the beast by the head and simply tore it away from its body. After this, he turned to Stoker himself, declaring that it was now his turn. But Stoker was in no hurry to agree. He coldly noted that people with loved ones always have weak spots. He then proposed a deal. If Adhisalai gave him the armor he had obtained in the dungeon, he would allow him and his sister to leave alive. When asked what would happen otherwise, Stoker replied that he would kill both of them. His words were supported by the golem standing behind him. It needed a human sacrifice to maintain its life force, and Xiao was currently in its hands. Adhisalai realized that he could not attack the golem directly, because then he would certainly hit his sister. But it was also impossible to drag out the fight with Stoker. In that case, Xiao's life would fade away anyway. Adhisalai found himself face to face with a dangerous opponent. Stoker controlled a massive golem, and it moved step by step straight towards him. The formidable monster inspired fear. His strength was enormous, and his body seemed invulnerable. However, everything changed in an instant. The stone mass suddenly crumbled into many fragments, as if the forces holding it together had been broken. Adhisalai did not miss the moment. He picked up Xiao in his arms to protect her from possible danger. Stoker stood there in amazement. He couldn't understand how this guy could destroy his creation. The situation seemed illogical, inexplicable. His gaze accidentally slid to the side, and there he noticed the source of the destruction. Miyamoto appeared on the battlefield. She managed to intervene in time and neutralize the threat. The girl assured Adhisalai that Xiao was okay and that the girl was not hurt. Now her attention was focused solely on the enemy. Miyamoto was going to deal with Stoker herself. Stoker looked at her warily. He didn't understand when exactly this girl had managed to awaken her powers. He had never heard of any news of her capabilities before, and her intervention itself came as a surprise to him. However, Adhisalai interrupted her intentions. He asked Miyamoto not to engage in battle, but to take Xiao and carry her to a safe place. He intended to complete the confrontation with Stoker entirely on his own, without resorting to anyone's help. Miyamoto complied with his request and promised to take care of the girl, taking her to her family's home where she would be safe. Stoker, watching the proceedings, grinned. He declared that this was precisely Adhisalai's fatal mistake. Before this, the guy had a chance to survive, but now, according to him, he signed his own death warrant. The fight began. The encounter with such an opponent turned out to be much more dangerous than Adhisalai could have expected. He immediately noticed that the enemy was using vampire abilities, combining magic and the power of blood. In response, Adhisalai rained fire down on him, but it only caused minor damage, barely touching Stoker's flesh. He only chuckled, noting that the young man was too naive if he thought that an ordinary flame could stop him. The next second, Stoker activated his hidden power, the blood seal. Adhisalai felt an invisible trap closing around him. His movements were constrained, the space was closed, and it seemed impossible to escape. The power of the seal was absolute. It could seal anyone, regardless of level and experience. But suddenly, something happened that Stoker himself had not expected. The moment the seal was completely closed, Adhisalai disappeared. There was no trace left where he had just stood. Stoker was dumbfounded. His technique never failed, and it subdued even those who were many times stronger than him. But this guy just disappeared, as if he had been torn from space itself. In fact, at that critical moment, Adhisalai activated the task he had previously received. This was his only chance for salvation. A hidden mechanism worked, and he was transported to another place. The battle with Stoker was interrupted, but a new test awaited him ahead. It had already begun, and now the young man had to go through it to the end, not knowing what dangers awaited him further. Adhisalai was tasked with destroying the fallen apostle, and he prepared for battle without hesitation. The creature he was about to fight looked menacing and alien, but the young man felt no fear. His body moved with honed confidence, and the first blow of the sword was devastating. The monster's head rolled with a dull sound across the stone floor of the dungeon. At that moment, his thoughts were focused on the reward. The monster was at level 25, which meant the experience points should be quite generous. However, the joy did not last long. Before his eyes, what should have turned into a lifeless body suddenly came to life. The fallen apostle rose as if death had no power over him. Adhisalai didn't attach much importance to this. He killed once, he could do it again. The sword flashed again, and the enemy fell a second time. But as soon as he took a step back, the monster rose again. With each new attack, each fatal blow, the young man felt growing irritation. He crushed the enemy's flesh time after time, cutting off limbs, piercing the heart, splitting the skull. But all this turned out to be useless. The apostle rose up again and again, and this was repeated until the very essence of what was happening began to seem meaningless. Adhisalai thought. Simple force and technique did not give results here. His eyes narrowed, and he tried to take a broader view of the situation. After all, this was a dungeon, created for a reason. Each of these places was ruled by a master hidden deep in its heart. The monster was just a doll, a puppet, meaninglessly reborn while the true puppeteer remained in the shadows. Having realized this, the young man stopped wasting his energy on the senseless destruction of the enemy. He broke through the apostle, ignoring his revivals, and stepped deeper into the dark hall. There, among the distorted magical structures, he came face to face with the one who controlled the dungeon. The gaze of the powerful being was full of hatred and malice, but Adhisalai did not flinch. His blow was decisive. At that very moment, control over the dungeon collapsed, and with it, the apostle's life finally faded away. The task was completed. For this, he received an unusual reward: the ability to summon his subordinates even outside the dungeons. Now his army could follow him everywhere. But there was a limitation. He could only summon one group of warriors at a time. This opened up new opportunities for him, strengthened his position, and inspired confidence in future battles. Meanwhile, Stoker, waiting outside, was puzzled as to where Adhisalai could have disappeared to. It seemed to him that the guy couldn't just leave, and he was wary. But suddenly, the young man appeared right behind him, silent as a shadow itself. Stoker grinned, considering this a fatal mistake of the enemy. He was sure that now he could finish off the enemy with one blow. But Adhisalai, looking him straight in the eye, spoke cold words. Now it was not he, but Stoker, who had to prepare for death. The spirit of Adhisalai finally suppressed Stoker's resistance. Summoning his army of the dead, he dealt a crushing blow. But Stoker was not willing to give up so quickly. He tried to move into Adhisalai's body. He had managed to penetrate into the world of his soul. Stoker thought it was a victory. There the soul of the Prince of Darkness appeared before him, and he saw with his own eyes his true, terrifying appearance. Having learned who was in front of him, Stoker begged for mercy. But Adhisalai was adamant. He destroyed the enemy. The system credited him with experience points, and he increased the level of his abilities. The vampire's new abilities were now completely at his disposal, and his equipment automatically improved, gaining features that he did not have before. As a reward, he decided to take Stoker's weapon, an epic weapon, the possession of which gave a lot of advantages. It was more powerful than what Adisalai had, and the boy felt how the power of this artifact combined with his own energy. But the approach of strangers reminded him that it was time to leave before he attracted unnecessary attention. A group of people from the association arrived at the scene, and the first thing they saw were corpses. Among them, they noticed one of the Wolf Spirit clan, and they had an uneasy premonition. If someone dared to cross the path of the Wolf Spirit, then his leader would deal with it. It turned out to be one of the awakened ones, the beast god Mat, the head of the Wolf Spirit clan. His appearance immediately set the tone of the situation. Even the bravest lost confidence in their actions. Meanwhile, one of the awakened was informed that Stoker was dead. He had never had any sympathy for him, but now whoever killed Stoker could not go unpunished. The old man also asked about the fate of the auction at which they could exhibit the artifact. The man said he was going to sell the weapon because it was not controlled by anyone and could become dangerous in the wrong hands. The old man just sighed, thinking that this weapon was perfect, and regretted that there was no person who was able to control it properly. Adisalai arrived at the Miyamoto clan's mansion. The mansion looked luxurious and majestic, but compared to his own palace, it seemed much more modest. At the entrance, he was met by a middle-aged man who held the position of deacon of the family. He introduced himself as the family's confidant and spiritual mentor. Adisalai immediately noted that his level reached the 40th step, which indicated considerable experience and status. The deacon expressed deep gratitude on behalf of the entire family for the fact that the young man helped their lady to awaken. For Adisalai, this was only a minor detail, and he calmly replied that it was not a big deal for him. At the same time, the priest confessed that in a recent duel against Adisalai, the last awakened heir of their family had fallen. As they entered the mansion, Adisalai's younger sister rushed towards him. She happily tried to talk to him, but he gently stopped her, saying that he had urgent business and they could talk later. The restraint in his words showed that he did not want to be distracted from the main purpose of the visit. Then he was escorted into the hall where Mrs. Miyamoto herself was waiting for him. The woman's gaze was attentive and serious. She clearly regarded Adisalai as a man whose future was closely intertwined with the fate of her family. There was a cautious openness in her demeanor, as if she saw him not only as an ally, but also as a possible suitor. The conversation began with the main thing. She was interested in how he managed to deal with such a dangerous opponent as Stoker. In response, Adisalai only briefly noted that he has his own methods of struggle. His tone did not allow for further questioning, as if this phrase concealed an abyss of secrets and techniques that were better left undiscovered. Miyamoto, however, warned him that such actions could be extremely risky, since every trace could lead to unpredictable consequences. Adisalai confidently assured her that he had not left the slightest evidence, and that no one would know about his involvement. But Miyamoto made a compelling argument. Among those killed was a representative of the Wolf clan. This clan was famous for its unique ability to track and find those involved in their death. Their warriors could identify the enemy even at a great distance. However, the young man took her words calmly, almost indifferently, as if this threat did not concern him at all. Their measured conversation was suddenly interrupted by the same man, who appeared so unexpectedly that everyone froze. He brought news that would have alarmed anyone else but Adisalai. It turned out that the sword that had once belonged to him was no longer in Liu's possession. The weapon was put up for auction and was about to be sold. The news sounded like an alarm bell, but the young man himself only grinned. He understood perfectly well that no one would ever be able to truly take possession of this blade. The sword was connected to him by a special magical thread, recognized only one owner, and refused to obey strangers. Everything else was just a temporary illusion of possession. However, a determined determination flared up within Adisalai to take back what was rightfully his. He could not allow his symbol of strength and power to be in the hands of others, even if those hands were not capable of using it to its full extent. His thoughts were focused on the future, on how and where he would find the blade. and what steps he would have to take to restore the lost balance. Adisalai continued to hunt players. A chance encounter led him to a berserker warrior who intended to harm the girl. He intervened and dealt with the aggressor without difficulty, receiving a reward for the victory. At the same moment, the system notified him of additional experience that had come from his dungeon. Thanks to this, he reached level 20, which opened up the possibility of changing profession. However, the joy was marred by an unexpected event. The functions of his dungeon were blocked. This meant only one thing. Someone had managed to pass through his domain. Adisalai could hardly believe such a thing. To him, it seemed almost impossible. Meanwhile, the group of players who found themselves inside the dungeon still could not understand the true reasons why they were brought there. Most of them believed that the initiator of the expedition had purely personal goals and only wanted to boast of his achievements. Among the participants, Long Yanwu stood out, a player with the guardian profession who had reached level 20. This milestone was important for any warrior, because it was from this moment that the opportunity opened up to begin missions to change classes and choose a further path of development. At the same time, something happened in the city center that no one expected. Right before the eyes of the inhabitants, a huge dungeon suddenly opened up, the likes of which had never appeared in these lands before. Its sudden appearance caused panic and a storm of discussion. No one could explain where it came from, what forces were behind its discovery, and what threat it posed. Flames burst forth from the massive stone gates of the dungeon, engulfing entire blocks with terrifying speed, turning them into a sea of fire. The city was plunged into chaos, screams, confusion, fleeing residents. Everything indicated that a catastrophe had begun. At headquarters, from where the appearance and clearing of such places was usually controlled, there was an atmosphere of horror and bewilderment. People watching the scene were shocked. The dungeons for changing professions had never before caused such large-scale destruction. For them, this was something impossible, something outside the established order. Soon, the silence in the headquarters hall was broken by a system notification. It explained that the source of the raging fire was precisely the opened dungeon. This news finally confirmed the suspicions. What was happening was not an ordinary event, but pointed to something much larger and more dangerous. The commander, observing the scene of destruction, understood that something had happened that contradicted all the laws and rules of their world. On that day, every warrior and every guard who had not yet changed their profession received the same notification from the system. They were informed about the opening of a new dungeon, intended for obtaining professions, but its description itself hinted at the unusualness of what was happening. For most, it was just an unexpected chance, but not for all. Adisalai, who was closely following the developments, immediately grasped the true meaning of what was happening. He understood that an incredible opportunity had opened up before him, one that only comes along once in a lifetime. The new dungeon held the opportunity to obtain a rare profession, a necromancer knight. In his homeworld, this class had disappeared without a trace many years ago, and the fact that it had reappeared here seemed incredible. For Adisalai, this discovery was akin to a revelation. He saw before him a path that could change his destiny forever and elevate him above the rest. This became a challenge. He had to use every opportunity to get this class. The association, realizing the danger and temptation that the gates held, hastened to seal them, hoping to at least temporarily hold back the onslaught of those who thirsted for change. But Adisalai was confident that no seals or prohibitions could block his path. Deep down, he knew that the strength and determination he had built up in his heart would open the way for him where others could not go. Crowds of players flocked to the gates as if to a shrine. Each dreamed of the opportunity to change their profession, get a chance to rewrite their destiny, and start a new chapter. People and representatives of other races formed a dense crowd, pushing and rushing forward. However, it was here that they were met by a formidable guard, a paladin of the 35th level. His stern expression made it clear that it would not be easy to get through. The conditions were stated clearly and coldly. Only those who defeated him in battle would be able to pass. For most players, this sounded like a mockery. The paladin was too strong, and few dared to test their fate. One of the brave men, gathering his courage, rushed into the attack, but his attempt ended instantly. He fell before he even had time to get close. The crowd stood in amazement, fully aware of the incredible difference in strength and power between the opponents. At that moment, Adisalai moved resolutely towards the gate. His movement evoked laughter and mocking glances. The guard himself allowed himself a grin, considering the young man just another reckless newcomer. The paladin emphasized that he was only willing to let 2 level 24 warriors through, thereby depriving the others of hope. For Adisalai, this sounded like a challenge. In his eyes, such a condition was the epitome of injustice. Not wanting to make peace, he attacked one of the challengers, easily throwing him aside. There was tension in the air. The crowd was buzzing, and conflict could break out at any moment. However, a man, an employee of the Miyamoto family, intervened. A man whose presence alone was a symbol of power and influence. His words cooled the ardor of those present. He reminded them that Adisalai was an ally of their family, and no one would dare to touch him. But the young man himself did not want to hide behind someone else's name. Inside him burned the desire to prove his own strength. Coming closer, he challenged the paladin to combat. The fight unfolded quickly. The guard, confident in his superiority, attacked first, but his blow was repelled. Adisalai, without wasting a second and acting with the determination of a warrior, immediately went on a furious offensive, putting all his strength and will to win into the attack. His attacks were fast and accurate, and even the paladin's sacred barrier couldn't withstand the onslaught. The young warrior grabbed his opponent, depriving him of the ability to resist, and brought the fight to its logical conclusion. The paladin, defeated and disarmed, realized the futility of his efforts. He admitted defeat and, begging for mercy, gave way. The crowd was noisy, not believing what had happened before their eyes. Adisalai, not paying attention to the reactions of those around him, stepped towards his goal. Ahead of him lay a dungeon that promised changes not only in his fate, but also, perhaps, in the fates of many others. As he walked forward, he noticed that there were quite a few newcomers among those gathered, but there were also players of a much higher level. The young man concluded that the elders had not come for themselves. Their task was to lead the inexperienced forward. In this mixture of hope and ambition, the heat of things to come was palpable. It was then that he felt a familiar aura. His attention was drawn to a man with a calm yet sinister strength. It was Li Ji, the clan leader of the Death Spirit Guild. The leader's gaze turned to another figure standing nearby, and informed him that he now had a worthy opponent. It was Yan Wu, the man rumored to be a great warrior in the future. Adisalai, following his directed attention, also noticed him. Behind Yang Wu stood his daughter, Ng'er, a representative of the same race to which Adisalai himself belonged. Thus, having stepped over the fallen guard, Adisalai not only approached the gates of the dungeon, but also found himself in the center of a web of new alliances. His journey was just beginning, and ahead lay a road where every step could be decisive. Li Ji was not happy with being ignored, but the Miyamoto family butler noticed that the man's energy itself was giving off such an impression. He agreed and congratulated the family on Nana finally awakening, suggesting that her late father would have been happy about it. The young man asked if he was talking about the father who died in the battle against the Demon King. In response, Li Ji said that Uncle Miyamoto had helped during the retreat, and during the decisive battle, Adisalai had gone berserk and killed many players. According to his version of events, Miyamoto's father distracted the Demon King so that the others could strike, thereby putting his own life in danger. The boy knew it was a lie, but he was curious about what exactly Li Ji was trying to hide. The clan leader then pointed to Long Yan Wu, a member of his guild, and remarked that they could become friends in the dungeon. After that, he entered the dungeon first, leaving a final note that guests were always welcome to visit his guild. Adisalai mentally promised himself that he would definitely do this just to kill this man. Now he knew that there was another survivor of his race. Perhaps the girl had knowledge of what happened after his death. The butler asked if the young man held a grudge against the head of the clan and warned that it was better not to quarrel with such people. Adisalai only assured him that everything was fine. Soon, a man appeared and announced that everyone should form groups to go into the dungeon. He warned that the hidden profession of the necromancer knight changed the very structure of the dungeon, and it was possible to obtain this rare specialization here. However, only knights and warriors could enter. However, there were no restrictions on summoning creatures. Only one dungeon was so free, the domain of Adhisalai. Not wanting to listen to any more empty talk, the boy headed inside. The man asked him if he was going to go alone, and he answered in the affirmative. The other players didn't like this arrogance, but Long Yanwu noted that the young man somehow resembled himself. Nji noted that such behavior would inevitably make him an enemy to everyone. But she also admitted that teaming up was no less a stupid decision. Adisalai found himself in a location filled with lava. He realized that the other participants in the test were scattered in different places. The first enemy appeared before him, a huge fireworm which he destroyed without much effort. But soon a whole flock of similar creatures followed him. Adisalai dealt with them one by one, considering them easy prey. His level points increased rapidly. However, he could not use them. The system was still blocked, and he did not know how to unblock it. She only gave the task: kill the boss and find a way out of the dungeon to open a portal to the city. There was no talk of retraining. But his priority was different. He had to find Anji. The girl was in danger. What worried Adisalai the most was Long Yanwu. He believed that the guy was much more dangerous than he seemed at first glance. As Adisalai moved forward, he noticed a group of players. He had an idea to secretly observe their actions. Among them, one young man stood out, who had a special card. When a fire golem attacked them, he activated the card and destroyed the enemy, then ordered his comrades to finish off the golem before it could recover. This ability immediately attracted the attention of Adisalai. He watched the young man closely, but soon he revealed his true nature. After waiting for his allies to deal with the monster, he treacherously killed them. He even intended to take the life of his own partner. Just as he was about to attack the girl, Adisalai's voice came from behind him. He knew that this guy had what he needed. After defeating the owner of the cards, Adisalai calmly took his trophies, noting that they were disposable. The map intended for the battle with the boss attracted special attention. It could prove decisive in the future test. The girl, miraculously saved from death, tried to express gratitude, but the young man hesitated. The thought flashed through his mind that it would be better to eliminate the witness to avoid unnecessary complications. However, the situation changed dramatically. A new enemy appeared from the depths of the dungeon. It was a man who introduced himself as Chang Shou, a level 55 player. He made it clear that the girl was under his protection and no one would dare harm her. Adisalai was astonished. To see such a high-level player in front of him in this place meant that he was facing a threat far beyond anything he had ever encountered before. A fight with such an opponent could be more dangerous than any monsters. However, the girl stood up for him and explained to her uncle that it was this guy who saved her life. Changshu was forced to apologize to the guy for the misunderstanding. The girl introduced herself. Her name was Janzin, and it turned out that Changshu was indeed her relative. She invited Adisalai to join them, promising that together they would be guaranteed victory. However, he refused, preferring to act alone. At the same time, he looked closely at Changshu. He explained that his ability was called Astrologer. It allows you to change skills when entering dungeons. After parting with them, Adisalai realized that it was better not to have any unnecessary connections with such a player. Changshu also thought about it. The boy seemed too secretive to him. Using the power of an astrologer, the ability to see into the future, he tried to find out whether Adisalai posed a threat. However, his mystical vision did not yield any new information. This emptiness only strengthened the suspicions. the mysterious player posed too great a threat. The thought of getting rid of this man as soon as possible did not leave him. He understood that in such situations, any delay could result in failure. Meanwhile, Long Yanwu and NG continued their journey through the dangerous corridors of the dungeon. Their footsteps echoed as they soon came to a large hall where a fiery demon spirit was descending upon a group of players. The unfortunates tried their best to hold back the creature's onslaught, but their attacks did almost no damage. Each new blow of the demon burned through the air, leaving behind only smoking traces, and the players barely kept their lives, desperately fighting back. And Jia immediately realized that this was her ally's moment. She glanced at him without hesitation, calling him to action. Yan Wu stepped forward. There was no trace of doubt or fear in his movements. In one swift movement, he was right in front of the monster. His blade, shining with a cold light, cut through the demon's burning body. The creature was gone in an instant. The victory was so quick and absolute that no one had time to realize what had happened. The players who witnessed this were stunned. It was obvious to them that Yang Wu had used an ability that did not belong to the Guardian class. His fighting technique, precision of movements, and power of blows revealed him to be a fencer. The revelation of this secret made them wary. In such circumstances, everyone expected the worst, that he would kill everyone present to keep the secret. But events took an unexpected turn. Long Yanwu did not get rid of the witnesses. His behavior seemed the opposite of what was expected. He just grinned, and his gaze flashed with confidence, bordering on defiance. For him, the presence of other players was not a threat, but an opportunity. He needed witnesses to his triumph. After all, only they could confirm his strength when the time came and tell about how exactly he managed to defeat the dungeon boss. Adisalai, who was watching this from the sidelines, did not miss a single detail. His attention was drawn to Yang Wu's strength, to the cold ease with which the boy had destroyed the demon. A plan instantly formed in his head. Following this group was the only right decision. The tactic is simple. Wait without interfering while they weaken the main boss, and then deal the finishing blow yourself and take the reward. After the swift victory, Long Yanwu looked unshakable. There was an iron calm in his posture, and every step and swing of his weapon seemed to emphasize that he was capable of breaking through any trials. His movements remained precise and confident, requiring no extra effort. It seemed as if he anticipated his opponent's weaknesses in advance, striking them in their most vulnerable spots. It was as if he was not just a player, but a natural-born warrior who had honed his skills to perfection. From the outside, this scene was truly stunning, striking not only in its scope, but also in the strength of the emotions it evoked in everyone who witnessed it. Adisalai, experienced and observant, clearly grasped the details of the fighting style. He was struck by the similarities between Yang Wu's technique and the techniques he himself had once used. This similarity could not be accidental. The longer he watched the young man, the stronger the thought became that their meeting was not a simple coincidence. Both had sharpness, quick reactions, and the ability to calculate moves in advance. But at the same time, he thought that Yang Wu was too self-confident and stupid. True strength lay not only in the ability to destroy enemies, but also in the ability to wait, to remain cautious, and not to rush headlong. Yang Wu acted as if the entire world had to bow before his sword. When the last of his opponents fell, the youth headed straight for the statue standing in the center of the hall. Her appearance was majestic and frightening at the same time, and she emanated the ancient power contained in the seal. At that moment, a spirit appeared nearby, trying to keep him from doing anything rash. He warned that touching the seal was dangerous, and that the consequences could be irreparable. But Yan Wu didn't listen. He was certain that his destiny was hidden behind the seal, and that breaking the bonds would open the way for him to meet the dungeon's main boss. With reckless determination, he brought down a blow on the seal, and it shattered like glass. At that very moment, the earth shook. Powerful geysers began to burst forth from the depths of the dungeon, raising clouds of steam and stones. The hall was filled with a deafening roar, which grew louder with each passing second, and became so powerful that its vibrations began to shake the massive stone walls. Soon, a death spirit warhorse emerged from the gaping crack, its black body shrouded in darkness and its eyes glowing with a crimson light. He moved so fast that he seemed like a phantom. Yang Wu charged forward and unleashed a powerful blow, but the sword only pierced through empty space. At first glance, it seemed that the attack had missed its target, but Adisalai, who was watching what was happening, immediately realized that it was not a miss. The horse had incredible speed, capable of eluding even the fastest attacks. And then a voice cut through the air, heavy, filled with anger and ancient hatred. It sounded everywhere, from the stone, from the air, from the darkness itself. The voice said that the seal had held her for a whole 1,000 years. Now, having broken free, she intends to take revenge on people for her imprisonment. That voice belonged to the Mistress of Hell, a level 60 being whose strength surpassed anything that had ever been encountered in the dungeon. The Mistress of Hell turned her gaze to the people. Hatred and the desire for retribution for the 1,000-year imprisonment burned in her eyes. As if to confirm her determination, she launched her first devastating attack, directing all her strength towards Yang Wu. Only thanks to the intervention of Anji did the boy manage to escape certain death. Enraged that her victim had escaped, the Mistress of Hell hurled a spear filled with the flames of the underworld at her opponents. At that moment, Adisalai intervened. He seemed to appear out of nowhere and intercepted the deadly weapon, stopping it in midair. This act caused genuine amazement in the demoness. Curiosity awakened in her a desire to find out who this impudent opponent was, and then the man revealed himself to her and everyone present. He told her his name and title, the immortal demon king Adisalai. Angier, hearing his words, was stunned with surprise. It seemed impossible. She was sure that her father had died long ago, and now she could not believe her ears. Doubt and hope fought in her heart. Adisalai, seeing his daughter's confusion, spoke softly to her. He assured her that he was alive and would henceforth always be there to protect her from any danger. These words finally dispelled the girl's doubts. The warmth of recognition ignited in her heart. However, anxiety and curiosity prompted her to ask the question, why did he end up in a human body? To this, Adisalai responded only evasively, promising to explain later. Right now, it was more important for him to deal with the enemies and fulfill his duty. First of all, he declared that he intended to destroy Long Yan Wu, who had enslaved his daughter. But Ngo stopped him. She resolutely objected that the young man was not an enemy, but an ally. All these years, Long Yan Wu had protected her, kept her safe from danger. The girl begged her father to trust her words. Adisalai, seeing his daughter's sincerity, gave in to her request. He temporarily left Yan Wu aside, realizing that it was more important to defeat the enemy than to stir up old suspicions. The Mistress of Hell watched this unexpected scene with curiosity. A shadow of mockery flashed in her eyes. She said that sooner or later all roads would still lead them to her domain, to the depths of the underworld, and then she brought down unquenchable hellfire on her opponents. With their forces combined, Adisalai, his daughter, and Long Yan Wu once again launched an attack. Their blows merged into a single impulse, but the power of the Mistress of Hell was too great. Her body, enveloped in demonic flames, seemed invulnerable. Attacks only inflicted superficial wounds, without causing any noticeable harm. Adisalai quickly assessed the situation. The gap between their forces and the enemies was enormous. This battle could not be won with direct attacks alone. Meanwhile, the demoness, as if enjoying the despair of her enemies, coldly declared that she would begin her reprisal against the weakest one. All of her monstrous energy fell upon Anji. A blinding stream of hellish flame rushed towards her. The helpless girl, realizing that she was unable to resist such pressure, screamed in horror, feeling the approach of death. Adisalai, overcome with rage, did not hesitate for a second. His eyes filled with a bloody light, and he activated the vampire mark, one of his most destructive abilities. A moment later, the warrior's body flared with an aura of dark power, and he brought down a dragon strike on his enemy, putting all his accumulated energy into it. Every move was aimed at one thing only: to crush the powerful dungeon boss. Meanwhile, Long Yanwu, who was standing behind, did not remain indifferent. He activated a rare saint healing skill. Yanwu firmly told Adisalai that the girl whose body and soul were in the power of the demoness could still be saved if she fought to the end. However, the mistress of hell only laughed, her voice echoing throughout the hall. She said that all their efforts were pointless. Their attacks did not cause her any harm. The demoness's words awakened a familiar feeling in Adisalaya. A weight of helplessness rose in his chest, the same one he had experienced in the distant past, when his loved ones were suffering and he, being weak, could not help them. But now he was not going to let fate mock him again. Gritting his teeth, Adisalai rushed forward. His body glowed with a bloody halo. He activated the blood explosion technique, sacrificing part of his own life force for even greater power. With each passing second, Adisalai's blows became faster and more destructive, as if the very air around him was heating up from the tension of their collision. His fist cut through space with the fury of a raging storm, and even the mistress of hell herself, accustomed to unconditional dominance, lost her composure for the first time. It was an insult to her that a mortal could reach her level, and the moment when the blow landed right in the face was a humiliation that she could not forgive. A flame flared in her eyes, mixing hatred, pain, and uncontrollable rage that could incinerate everything around. At that moment, he lost all restraint. All the power of his dark nature burst forth, and Adisalai unleashed an avalanche of attacks on the enemy. Each movement was accompanied by a whirlwind of fire and a lash of shadow, which made the very stone hall of the dungeon tremble. Long Yanwu watched this fight with amazement, not believing his own eyes. He clearly saw that this was not just a warrior with rare skill. There was something more than human technique or tenacity in every movement of Adisalaya. It seemed as if the very elements of hell had submitted to his will, and he had become an instrument of the inexorable force that was born in the depths of darkness. Even the level 60 boss, who was considered the invincible guardian of this dungeon, could not withstand the furious onslaught. Adisalaya's blows followed one after another, leaving his opponent no time to breathe. The demoness's resistance weakened with each passing second, and soon her body, exhausted of strength, collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Yang Wu was shocked by what he saw. A realization flashed deep in his soul. Only someone whose origin was higher than human could reach such a level. Only a true demon king was capable of fighting with such boundless power and breaking the resistance of beings whose power was considered absolute. It was he who stood before him, the embodiment of a legend that until that moment many had considered fiction. But the joy of victory was short-lived. The stone vaults of the dungeon trembled, the air thickened and filled with a viscous, ominous energy. The body of the mistress of hell, already defeated, suddenly shuddered in convulsions, and a new, even darker stream of power emanated from it. It seemed that the defeat was only the beginning of something much more terrible than the fight itself. The atmosphere around them changed. Instead of the relief of defeating the boss, a feeling of growing threat fell upon everyone, as if the depths of hell had opened a second wind and were preparing to spill it out. The seemingly broken creature rose. Her appearance became more terrible than before, and her aura became many times stronger. She looked up at Adhisalai and grinned predatorily, promising to methodically destroy his body, piece by piece, turning his torment into a real nightmare. After a grueling battle, Yang Wu watched with bitterness as all his efforts were in vain. The demoness only became more furious. Her eyes sparkled, and an abyss of hatred could be felt in her appearance. But Adisalai, as if not noticing her anger, continued mockingly provoking her. It was as if he enjoyed her irritation, which only further kindled the flames of rage in her soul. Unable to bear it, she dealt him a powerful blow, putting all her strength and anger into it, trying to wipe the smug grin off his face. It was only after the blow that she realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She had no intention of killing him the first time. On the contrary, she planned to torture and mock this impudent mortal, to drive him to despair and make him beg for mercy. But Adisalai, contrary to her expectations, withstood the crushing blow and remained alive. The mistress of hell froze in amazement. She couldn't understand how this mortal had survived such a surge of power. Adisalai calmly admitted that she was in no position to harm him. According to him, he had a special skill that protected him from her attacks. The demoness didn't believe a single word, deciding that he was bluffing and stalling for time. But the guy decided to reveal his secret. When he rushed at her in a furious attack, he left a special mark on her body. It was a skill card that took time to activate. And now that moment has arrived. With cold determination, Adisalai activated his trap, a black hole that swallowed everything around it. From the depths of the dungeon came the dying cries of the mistress of hell. Her body and soul disappeared without a trace, destroyed by a terrible force. The system immediately reported his achievement. He defeated the level 60 boss and received the well-deserved points. As a reward, the Demon King's castle was unlocked, opening the way to new challenges. Moreover, he was given a mid-rank mission and a rare skill, Master of Hell, which enhances mastery of the fire element. Now Adisalai could truly develop control over the flames, turning them into weapons. But the respite was short-lived. A sharp voice came from behind, belonging to Chang Shou. He mistakenly decided that Adisalai was holding in his hands a rare item for changing professions, and demanded that he give it to him immediately. The girl, Jansen, who was standing nearby, tried to stop her uncle, reminding him that it was this young man who had recently saved her life. But Chang Shou was adamant. He stated that it was her father's order to obtain the artifact at any cost. Adisalai quickly realized that the man had misunderstood what was happening, and no amount of explanation would help. The situation threatened to turn into a brutal fight, especially since Chang Shou had a dangerous ability to change not only his own status, but also that of others. He warned Adisalai not to try to use the item which he thought was meant for changing profession. Otherwise, the demoness Ngr, who was also here, would die at the hands of his people. Adisalai found himself in a situation he was completely unprepared for. Events were unfolding rapidly, and he was forced to act at the limit of his capabilities. Long Yanwu was ready to intervene and thwart Chang Shou's plan at any moment, but the elder mage remained confident in his own superiority. He believed that he was in complete control of the course of events, and even the presence of Adisalai did not shake his conviction of victory. But the sudden laughter of the young man destroyed this feeling. The laughter was sharp, almost hysterical, as if born on the edge of madness, and left the enemies perplexed. No one could figure out what exactly made Adisalai laugh at such a tense moment, but he himself soon shed light on the reason. His voice was calm, but behind his words there was a threat that sent a chill down your spine. He admitted that he was unable to prevent the assassination of Ngr if his enemies decided to go through with it. However, if that happened, he swore that he would take Jansen's life right before their eyes. This threat changed the balance of power. Chang Shou, who had been confident and cold until now, felt uneasy. In front of him was not just a cheeky boy, but an opponent who could not be easily negotiated with or intimidated. Adisalai had shown himself to be prepared to act desperately and ruthlessly, and this unpredictability made him especially dangerous. To turn the situation in his favor, the young man proposed a new condition. He announced that he was giving them a chance. If they wanted to take his things, they could try to do it during the fight. While he fights, let them try to snatch them from him. By doing so, he intended to divert their attention from Ngr and force the enemies to focus solely on himself. This step was risky, but at the same time the only possible one, because he clearly understood that delay would lead to the death of his ally. Jansen could not come to terms with what was happening. She desperately tried to thwart her uncle's plans. But for him, his niece was only a minor obstacle on the way to his goal. Freed from her resistance, Changsho and his loyal subordinates rushed straight towards Adisalai. For the first time, the young man was faced with the need to fight against several opponents at the same time. Each of them possessed not only a high level of strength, but also vast combat experience. These were not random opponents, but battle-hardened warriors, and therefore the situation looked almost hopeless. However, it was this test that was to show how far Adisalai was willing to go to protect those who were dear to him. He always hoped that it wouldn't come to this point, because individual fights could still be endured. But against a group of strong warriors, the chances were extremely slim. As the young man fell to the ground, his gaze accidentally fell on a figure that appeared nearby. It was a horse, but not just any horse. A death spirit war horse that had appeared after the seal was broken. At first, he couldn't even believe his eyes, but he quickly realized that this horse could be his salvation. His whole nature suggested, at any cost, he must take possession of this creature. However, Changsho, noticing the escape, was not going to let his prey escape. He used a formidable shooting stars technique aimed straight at Adisalai. The combined attack looked devastating, and the enemies were sure that the young enemy was already dead. They were looking forward to taking away from him a rare item that would open the way to a change of profession. But their confidence proved premature. Suddenly, flames fell from above, shocking everyone with their fury. Changsha's subordinates were at a loss as to what was happening, and only a moment later did they realize the impossible. Adisalai had survived. Moreover, he was already racing straight towards them on horseback. And then it became clear. It was the horse that was the very object that opened up a new profession. The system confirmed the guess, informing Adisalai that he had now become a necromancer knight. New skills were unlocked for him: Hellfire Blizzard and Death Resonance. This power literally overwhelmed him, giving him a feeling of confidence that he had never known before. Changsha's henchmen did not waver and rushed into the attack again, hoping to overwhelm them with numbers. The blows rained down one after another, but the young man, armed with new skills, parried them with unexpected ease. His enemies still considered him doomed, but Adisalai himself thought otherwise. He perceived this fight as training, as an opportunity to test in practice the abilities bestowed by the system. The climax came when he summoned the Hellfire Blizzard. The blazing whirlwinds mixed with icy energy, destroying the attackers and trapping Changsho himself in an icy prison. Frost crystals bound his body, paralyzing him and making him unable to resist. Adisalai calmly approached the enemy. Changshu, admitting defeat, asked only for a quick death. But the young man had already moved to a new level of development. Instead of mercy, he decided to test another gift: the ability Summon the Spirit of Death. As soon as the spell was cast, the fallen enemies rose from the ground, turning into soulless zombies. Their eyes were filled with emptiness, their bodies moved awkwardly, but obeyed the will of their new master. Adisalai gave them the order to attack Changsha, and although the zombies did not have any special speed or weapons, their bites were deadly. Every touch infected, turning the victim into the same soulless monster. Realizing this, the young man felt his strength grow. Adisalai gradually strengthened his forces, with each step getting closer to the main goal. His level had risen, his abilities had noticeably strengthened, and now he felt that he was on the right track. NG watched him with admiration. Even in a human body, her father remained as powerful as he had been before. Long Yanwu, seeing this, inadvertently called Adisalai father. This action irritated him, and the boy was hit. Now Adisalai's attention was focused on him. He said bluntly that he saw no reason to trust Yang Wu. However, he insisted on a chance to prove his usefulness and offered to help kill Li Ji. When asked about his motives, Yang Wu admitted that he possessed a rare ability. Death domination. By touching a person, he could copy their power, but only one and only in the form in which the owner possessed it at the moment. According to him, Li Ji kept him around not as an ally, but only as a victim, and as soon as the right opportunity arose, he would kill him without hesitation. Yan Wu could tell a lot about Li Ji's strengths and weaknesses, making him a valuable ally. Adisalai, understanding the risk, still decided to give the guy a chance, especially since NG already trusted him. After this, he turned to his daughter and asked why she did not use her abilities to their full potential. NG explained that her powers had been sealed by Chen Hao. Then Adisalai asked what happened after his death. The girl replied that a bloody massacre had taken place. The 4 surviving players had destroyed the rest and taken all the armor and laurels for themselves. The inhabitants of the dungeon fled, and only a few managed to escape. When he asked where these survivors could be found now, Angie suggested that they were still in the dungeon. She also said that the gates of the dungeon never closed after his death. It was now clear that the reason was that Adisalai was still alive. The problem, however, was that finding survivors in such a place was extremely difficult. Angie warned that the dungeon itself was guarded by Chen Hao, the guardian of the Garden of Eden, one of those who once killed Adisalai. During the conversation, everyone forgot about Janzin. The girl woke up and, with difficulty coming to her senses, the first thing she asked was about her loved ones. Adisalai calmly replied that their bodies were fine. She was relieved that he had spared them, but the young man clarified, they were dead. Janzin couldn't believe what she heard. According to her, her loved ones were not bad people. But Adisalai objected. They tried to kill him, and before that, they dealt with many players who represented competition for her. The girl still didn't believe him and threatened to tell the truth. Then NG remarked to her father that it would be easier to get rid of her right now. But Adisalai just chuckled. It didn't matter to him. Even if Janzin decided to spill everything, they would come for him. And that meant there would be an opportunity to earn new experience points and level up. Few players emerged from the dungeon. When asked who received the legendary profession of the Necromancer Knight, Adisalai admitted that it was him. This did not cause any delight. On the contrary, the guilds tried to lure him to their side, but he refused. Later, while walking with Xiao, Adisalai appeared lost in his own thoughts. His gaze was directed somewhere into the distance, and the girl immediately noticed that his mood had changed. Although she tried to find out what exactly was troubling him, the young man preferred not to go into details, brushing her off and citing the fact that only dark, oppressive thoughts were swarming in his head. It was too personal for him, and he didn't want to burden Xiao with unnecessary worries. Instead, he promised himself internally that he could only be truly happy when she was happy. This thought became a kind of anchor for him, a reminder of the goal for which he continued to move forward, despite difficult trials. Xiao, not noticing the depth of his doubts, smiled radiantly and expressed confidence that her happiness was unchangeable. Meanwhile, Adisalai's fame spread throughout the city with astonishing speed. More and more people recognized him right on the streets. His profession was rare and unique. There were only a few people like him in the city, and this made him stand out from the others. He himself was surprised at how quickly life had changed. Until recently, he had remained an unknown young man, and now his name was becoming more and more recognizable. But in this glory, he could not leave the thought of Janzin. Enough time had passed, and she still had not told anyone the truth about what had happened. He could only be perplexed and amazed by the woman's logic. Her silence seemed like a riddle that he could not solve. A sudden incident interrupted his train of thought. While walking, Xiao ran into a strange man. At first glance, he looked completely ordinary and even politely apologized, after which he quickly disappeared from sight. But Adisalai immediately sensed the threat emanating from him. It was not his behavior itself that alerted him, but the hidden danger that his intuition sensed. The most suspicious thing was that the man's level was low. Usually such opponents could not pose a threat, But the young man knew that indicators could be hidden, and the more someone tried to appear weak, the more reasons for mistrust arose. The stranger soon turned the corner and found himself in a deserted alley. There he found a man standing at the very entrance to the building, vigilantly examining the surroundings and clearly acting as a security guard. He asked whether this territory really belonged to the Wild Wolves gang. The guard looked at him with disdain and replied that such people had no place here. There was a threat in his voice. However, the man only grinned, and a fierce determination appeared on his face. The guard, enraged, threatened to kill the impudent fellow if he did not leave. But the situation quickly turned around. The stranger had no doubt that the outcome would be the opposite. Not only was he not afraid, he had already decided that he would be the one to send the guard to the grave. No one and nothing could stop him on the way to his goal. Events developed rapidly. When people from the association arrived at the scene of the tragedy, they were met with a horrific picture. There were dozens of bodies on the ground, all of them members of the Wild Wolves gang. Not a single one of them survived. The evidence of a fierce battle was everywhere, but the result was clear. Nothing remained of the once formidable group. There was a dark atmosphere of hopelessness and fear in the air, and in the hearts of those who saw the consequences, the understanding was born that an enemy had appeared in the city that could not be trifled with. Despite their atrocities, such a death seemed too cruel. The association discussed traces of purple blood, known as a rare and expensive drug that was distributed illegally. It was assumed that he could have been the cause of the massacre. However, it was impossible to arrest the creator of the substance, since he turned out to be an influential player, the insect king Pak-il. At this time, Jansen came to her father to confess the failure of the mission. He didn't pay much attention to her uncle's death, as all his attention was focused on the impending war with the demons. He was expecting them to appear and was ready to unleash his full force on them. The demons, unable to withstand the pressure, retreated back into the dungeons. Now, they had to get into the human world at any cost and find their king in order to stop being targets for other people's training. They had to find him urgently in order to hand over the valuable item that they had been so carefully guarding all this time. Along with this, the man holding the girl's photograph in his hands recalled the promise he had given her about a quick end to their suffering. He continued to move towards his goal, striving to complete what he started. Having learned from the captured wild wolves that their leader was heading to the auction, he decided to follow him. Fate led him forward, and ahead awaited a new meeting with someone who accidentally ended up on his path. Adisalai was conducting another training session with Miyamoto. From the very beginning, he noticed that the girl was clearly holding back and not using all the power she possessed. This irritated him because he wanted to know the limits of his own capabilities and understand whether he could cope with opponents who possessed the power of the awakened. However, Miyamoto admitted that she does not do this by accident. The reason for her caution was that there was a child behind the wall, in the next room, and using all her power could result in tragedy. Unwilling to accept such restrictions, Adisalai suggested moving the training to another location, hidden from prying eyes. The girl agreed, warning that she was going to use her strongest move. She wanted to show him the true level of power of the awakened, but at the same time asked him not to take it too hard. When Miyamoto struck, Adisalai barely withstood its power. Only the timely activation of the defense saved him from defeat and quick death. He felt for himself how huge the difference could be between an ordinary fighter and an awakened one. Even though Miyamoto had only recently discovered this power, its capabilities were several times greater than his own. This thought struck him deeply. He clearly imagined how formidable those who had awakened much earlier must be. The gap was too great, and he realized that if he did not take action, he simply would not be able to survive the coming trials. Miyamoto noticed that after the test, the young man looked tense and depressed. She decided that he was tormented by his own weakness and had already taken a step to support him. But at that moment, Adisalai suddenly disappeared, causing a look of bewilderment on her face. The system immediately activated a secret mission for him, and in an instant, he found himself in a completely different place. People around were shouting in alarm and panic, that the monsters needed to be captured immediately before they caused more trouble. Adisalai, confused by what was happening, noticed a fragment of a mirror nearby and looked into it. The reflection shocked him. Instead of his usual human appearance, he saw the reflection of a goblin. The system immediately issued a new quest condition. His task was to find the Chimera core. At that moment, he realized that he was in a completely different role, and that a challenge lay ahead of him that was different from anything he had encountered before. Adisalai, who found himself in the body of a goblin, immediately realized that he was being hunted. The players were chasing him, and he was forced to run away. The thought that of all possible beings, he found himself in the weakest and most useless body made him angry and irritated. However, he soon noticed that this goblin had hidden potential. In the clash, he managed to destroy one of the attacking players without much difficulty. This discovery somewhat changed his attitude towards the situation, but the respite did not last long. A new group of opponents was chasing him. Realizing that he did not have the strength for a direct confrontation, Adisalai decided to hide. Hiding among the bushes, he waited until the hunt ceased and realized that he had temporarily escaped the threat. All of his normal abilities remained blocked, and the only landmark on the map was the target, the Chimera core. He headed there, sensing that the test would be much harder than it seemed at first glance. The weak players he had encountered earlier could not be a true test. Soon, his guess was confirmed. A man with clearly superior strength appeared at the entrance to the building. He grabbed Adisalai, and in the goblin's body he had no chance of winning. A moment later, his body was cut into pieces. But even as he was dying, Adisalai was not willing to accept such an end. He had come a long way, and he was not going to give up so easily. Noticing the Chimera core nearby, he crawled towards it with all his might. With half of his body, he managed to reach out and connect with the core. The system immediately changed the test conditions. Now he had to protect the core and hold out for only 1 hour. The guards, seeing that he was still alive, attacked again from all sides. Gathering his remaining strength, Adisalai grabbed their heads and unexpectedly absorbed parts of their bodies. Thus, he realized that he had acquired a new ability. Seeing containers with monsters imprisoned in them nearby, he decided to test this power on them as well. Having absorbed the monsters, Adisalai merged with their bodies and acquired new, terrifying forms. His body became a mixture of different creatures, making him virtually invincible. Filled with power, he set out to take revenge on the players who had recently nearly taken his life. The noise of the fight attracted the attention of a man standing at the entrance. He came out and saw before him a monster that was unlike any known creature. Adisalai confessed that he was the very goblin that the man had recently cut down. The enemy immediately realized that he had connected with the core of the Chimera, and warned that such power had its limits. She was unable to destroy the awakened player, which was himself. At that moment, Adisalai realized why the system had set the goal for survival for only an hour. He had never been given a chance to win in the first place. But his wounds were rapidly healing thanks to the monster's abilities, and the man noted that after the death of this creature, he intended to study its nature. However, Adisalai had no intention of allowing the enemy to take advantage of such a chance. A fierce battle ensued, but it gradually became clear that the enemy forces were too great. Then Adisalai decided not to fight directly, but to survive at any cost. He started to run, because the main condition was only to hold out for a certain amount of time. But the man was not going to let him go, and with the help of his abilities, grabbed him. The threads that held Adisalai's body were very strong. He could not free himself. The man gave Adisalai a fatal wound with poison. But Adisalai had no intention of dying alone. If there was a way to kill him, Adisalai intended to use it. There was an explosion. The poisonous substance filled the space. As a result, Adisalai found himself in the body of a tiny goblin again. His enemy was badly burned. He wanted to finish him off, but Adisalai, despite his weakness, firmly promised that one day he would find him and take revenge. The man didn't understand where the weak goblin got so much confidence from. But before he could strike, Adisalai disappeared. The time has expired, and the system has recorded the successful completion of the task. Returning to his body, he received a reward: the egg of a mysterious monster and a device for merging a chimera. It could only be used on monsters, not humans. This feature gave him the idea to test the device in his own dungeon, where he already had different types of monsters. To begin with, he decided to choose the weakest of his subordinates. The choice fell on zombies. By combining the two, he got one stronger one, but his power was not enough. He then continued the process until he created the Zombie King, the pinnacle of their evolution. It was impossible to unite the two kings. The structure did not allow it. After this, he decided to experiment with stronger creatures, and as a result, the evil demon of chaos was born. But Adisalai didn't stop there. He still had one more dungeon boss left, and he intended to combine it with the Zombie King. It was at this moment that the system alerted him to the player intrusion. For Adisalai, this was a great opportunity to test the new creations in real combat. Players, upon entering the dungeon, were surprised by the absence of monsters in the first stages of the journey. But soon, they met them. They were zombies of extraordinary strength. Their commander tried to organize a fight, but one of the participants noticed that these were high-class zombies that only lived in high-difficulty dungeons. Frightened, they fled. However, their retreat was interrupted by a new threat. An evil demon of chaos appeared from the darkness. His appearance was one of destruction and fury, and horror was reflected in the eyes of the players. Adisalai's experiment has proven its effectiveness. Now he was ready to continue, creating more and more terrifying monsters to strengthen his dungeon and get closer to his ultimate goal. The creation that Adisalai managed to create exceeded all his expectations. This time the result was truly perfect. A representative of the majestic and powerful dragon race appeared before him. The creature was level 60, which immediately spoke of its incredible strength. It bowed its head before its new master, acknowledging the power of the one who had managed to summon it. Adisalai looked at the subordinate creature with interest, and could not help but be surprised when he realized that the dragon in front of him was a female. The creature turned to him with a request to grant a name, because this was what cemented the connection between the summoner and the summoned. Adisalai didn't think twice before calling her Demon Dragon. The name, which reflected both her strength and her true nature, seemed to immediately appeal to his new ally. However, a moment later, her behavior changed dramatically. The majestic creature that had just demonstrated submissiveness suddenly began to behave playfully. Adisalai was not inclined to such antics. His character demanded seriousness and discipline from his subordinates. He made it clear that he expected strength from her, not jokes. To test the demon dragon's capabilities, he staged a small battle. The clash was short, but intense, and during the fight, Adisalai realized that her level of strength was not inferior to his own. For the first time in a long time, he felt confident. Now he had an ally who could support him even in a fight with an awakened one. However, they still had more pressing tasks. First of all, it was necessary to return the weapons that had been lost earlier. Without them, it was impossible to hope for a full-fledged resistance to the enemy. Adisalai decided that their first mission would be to go to the auction where people were going to sell his things. The weapons had to be returned at any cost. At the same time, elsewhere, events were taking place that foreshadowed a new clash. The king of the insects received alarming news. The man who was hunting them was already nearby. Hearing these words, Pak-il did not think for long. Rage overwhelmed him, and he immediately dealt with the messenger, bringing him death. He realized that the situation around him was changing. The danger was getting closer and closer. Pak-il suddenly realized that he was no longer alone in the room. The air around him thickened, foreshadowing danger. Before him stood an enemy he was sure he had destroyed earlier. This man, however, was alive and now demanded retribution for the past. His voice was cold and determined. He demanded that his sister Haley be released. and only in this case would he promise to grant Pak-il a less painful death. A fierce battle broke out between the opponents, during which Pak-il gradually began to lose strength. He was amazed at where the enemy got such incredible power, because previously he was considered an ordinary berserker. The man said that he was just as awakened. Pak-il refused to believe it, because they had already killed him once, dismembering him into pieces. However, the enemy explained that this was precisely the ideal condition for awakening his power. He again demanded to know where Haley was, but Pak-il stubbornly remained silent. Then the man warned that his death would be painful. At the crucial moment, Pak-il was saved by another awakened one who intervened in the fight. After this, Pak-il ordered to rush in pursuit of the attacker, but he stopped him, reminding him who is actually the creator and master, and who is the subordinate. He threatened Pak-il and said that he needed to urgently get more purple blood, otherwise he would die. Understanding the danger, Pak-il firmly decided to go to the auction and buy the necessary thing at any cost. The three of them arrived at the auction: Adisale, Miyamoto, and Xiao. The hero first asked about the level of security. The girl explained that she was almost absent, because the organizers were 4 awakened players, and no one would dare to rebel against them. However, Adisale had already planned to rob the entire auction. Xiao noticed an unusual potted plant in the hall, and wanted to buy it as a gift for her brother. But there was a girl nearby who also wanted the flower. Adisale immediately declared that no one had the right to offend his sister, and the situation threatened to escalate into a conflict. Then Miyamoto recognized her rival. It was her aunt. She greeted her niece upon awakening and, giving in, allowed her friends to take the flower. Finally, she gave advice: water the plant with blood. Adisale wanted to buy it himself, but Xiao insisted on paying for it, as it was her gift to her brother. Her brother gave in to her wishes. He turned to Miyamoto, asking her aunt's age, since she looked like a child. The girl explained that her relative was awakened and bore the title of Queen of Medicine. Adisale was uneasy about why such a woman would want this particular flower. After scanning it, he found only a sunset flower, quite ordinary in appearance. Remembering his aunt's words, Adisale watered the plant with blood. The secret was instantly revealed. A flower fairy from the demon world lived inside. She expressed her gratitude to the hero and declared her readiness to obey him. However, Miyamoto was irritated by her presence. She didn't like the way the flower fairy treated Adisale. The queue to enter the auction hall was huge. Many people arrived to participate in the bidding. Miyamoto admitted that she had a special pass card that allowed her to skip the line. Adisale asked her to take Xiao with her and take care of her, while he chose to stay behind. It was a convenient way to get rid of their presence for a while. When it was his turn, a guy from the Divine Dragon Guild intervened, cutting in ahead of the line. Adisale pretended not to object, but later followed him into the toilet and killed him there. The body turned out to be just right for creating a zombie. Holding the arm of a zombie who was barely able to stand on his feet, he walked into the building where the auction was taking place. He explained to the security that it was his rather tipsy friend. His path led to the area for select guests, and soon he found himself in the VIP section, where his gaze immediately fell on Miyamoto, who was sitting with Xiao. The atmosphere in the place was already tense, and soon it only grew more intense. Miyamoto was approached by her aunt, whose appearance caused a noticeable stir. She turned to her niece, trying to find out where her lover had disappeared to. Miyamoto explained that the guy she came with was her friend. Xiao, who was watching this scene, immediately showed hostility towards this woman, and a verbal altercation ensued between the two. Their loud voices quickly spread throughout the hall, and Pak-il, hearing the noise, came closer to figure out what was happening. He soon recognized a familiar face in the woman. It was the one who could have once helped him, but in difficult times chose to turn away. The memory of past grievances flashed through his mind, and he reminded her of her indifference with cold hostility. Meeting in such circumstances only exacerbated their enmity. Fujiwara, known as the goddess of dark shadows, had the chance to observe this confrontation. For her, any manifestation of human weakness and malice was of particular interest. For her, human passions were a kind of spectacle, and hostile outbursts gave more pleasure than dry commercial procedures. However, the excessive fuss could not last forever. The elderly man who was in charge of the trades intervened and called them to order. His authority was unquestionable, and he sternly warned those present, especially Fujiwara, that such behavior would not be tolerated within the walls of the auction house. The atmosphere gradually calmed down, and the audience's attention again focused on the upcoming event. Meanwhile, Xiao, troubled by her own thoughts, thought about her brother's future. She didn't want him to become like these people. The question of what awaited him after awakening troubled her heart. However, Miyamoto assured her that these people were already like this after birth. Their souls had been considered corrupted since early childhood. She was confident that Adhisalai would be able to avoid such involvement. The bidding finally began. The first lot was a rare artifact, the ascetic helmet. Its significance remained unclear to many, and so the stakes did not reach the level that the subject deserved. Adhisalai, who had been watching the proceedings closely, realized the true value of the find and decided that he would definitely try to take possession of it in the future when a more convenient moment presented itself. The next item on display was the Bell of Victory, an artifact capable of enhancing joint attacks and giving a significant advantage in battle to entire squads. This thing attracted much more interest from the participants. Adhisalai, realizing the importance of the trophy, decided to join the bidding. With each new bid, the price rose higher and higher, and the tension grew. He continued to fight for the right to possess the artifact for some time, but was eventually forced to give in. The amount offered by other participants turned out to be excessive, even for him. While passions were running high in the hall and attention was focused on the rare artifacts, a different drama was unfolding outside. The berserker was trying with all his might to break inside. The host announced that the main lot of the auction would be a unique remedy capable of bringing the player back to life. He was brought in under guard, causing tense whispers among those present in the hall. As an additional prize, they promised the legendary sword of the Demon King. It would go to the one who spent the most money in the bidding. After the death of its owner, this weapon lost its power, but still remained a priceless relic. The bidding began. Pak-il was ready to get the resurrection agent at any cost. Aunt Miyamoto, known as the Queen of Medicine, was also not going to let go of the potion she so desperately needed. The price rose rapidly, almost exponentially. Meanwhile, Adhisalai had his own plan: to create chaos and steal the most valuable prizes with the help of a controlled creature, while remaining an ordinary person to everyone. He set about implementing it. Adhisalai opened up a dungeon right in the middle of the hall. The players tensed up, preparing for an attack. Never before had anything like this happened at an auction. The presenter, in a panic, tried to call one of the 4 awakened ones on whose territory the auction was taking place. He didn't answer, being busy with his business. He was about to fight the awakened player. He tried to stop Matt from releasing the animals into the wild. It was at this moment that a stranger appeared in the middle of the hall. He demanded that Pak-il fight him and finish what he had started. The man identified himself as Arkan and claimed that Pak had kidnapped his sister, using her blood to create the purple blood. Adhisalai recognized him. They had crossed paths before. It was this man that he and Xiao had bumped into on the street. Moreover, he realized that Pak-il was the very opponent he had to fight while undergoing the test in the goblin's body. No player sided with Arkan, so Adhisalai put on his assassin player mask and declared that he would fight alongside him. The reaction of the audience was immediate. Everyone recognized the mask. It was worn by the same man who slaughtered players in the dungeons. Miyamoto, noticing Adhisalai's clothes, decided that her friend had been killed. In a rage, she rushed at the enemies, not realizing who was in front of her. She was stopped by a demon dragon who stood in her way. Meanwhile, Adhisalai attacked Pak-il, but he managed to escape and got to the healing potion. After drinking it, he not only regained his strength, but also became much stronger. Archon rushed into battle, but Pakil easily parried the blow and knocked him down. He was going to infuse him with a parasite and subjugate him to his will, making him his puppet. However, Adisalai managed to stop him. Now Pakil's attention was focused on him. In response, Adisalai reminded that he was not the only one who came for the artifacts and snatched the Demon King's sword. Pakil just laughed. Only the late Adisalai could wield this weapon. But suddenly, the blade responded to its owner. It was enveloped in powerful force and energy. Only then did Pakil realize the truth. Standing before him was the Lord of Hell himself. At that very second, a powerful stream of energy rushed into the sky, informing everyone that the Prince of Darkness was alive. All the players realized that Adhisalai had returned. They were about to face the one they had defeated with difficulty earlier. Chen Hao immediately left, guarding the entrance to the dungeon, and headed there. The demons, seeing this, were in high spirits. There was a chance to gain freedom and find their master. Liu also looked into the distance. He knew what this flow of power meant. Taking advantage of his confusion, the wounded mat turned into a kitten and disappeared. All four awakened ones realized that Adisalai was alive. They understood that he would definitely come for them. The system announced, Adhisalai can only use his power to its full potential for 1 minute. The demon dragon watched her master's power in amazement. Miyamoto, realizing that Adhisalai was alive, rushed to him, thirsting for revenge for her father's death. He realized that he couldn't waste his strength fighting her, and said that the culprits should be sought among the players who fought alongside her father. Meanwhile, Pa-il revealed his full potential, intending to destroy Adisalai. But the forces were incomparable. Adisalai easily crushed the enemy. The first of the awakened fell. Arhan was furious. He accused Adisalai of killing the only person who knew his sister's whereabouts. However, Adhisalai countered that Pak-il was still alive since the system had not sent a notification of his death. Pak-il himself, trying to survive, took the form of an insect, but he was caught by a mysterious woman who appeared at the scene of the battle. She approached Adisalai, stating that she wanted to discuss a matter with him. The danger emanating from this woman was immediately felt. The dragon demon offered to get rid of her, but the stranger confidently replied that they were not capable of it. She then returned Pak-il to Adisalaya and promised to keep his secret. Moreover, she made an appointment with him later. Where and when he will find out in time. Adisalai, taking advantage of the moment, took the wounded Miyamoto, and together with Arkan, they hastily left the scene of the battle without waiting for the appearance of other awakened ones. To hide, Adisalai suggested that Arkan hide in his dungeon and promised to help find his sister. Meanwhile, Chen Hao arrived at the scene. There he found only a woman who confirmed that it was Adhisalai, and added that he was hiding under the guise of one of the members of the Divine Dragon clan. In this way, she diverted suspicion from the real Adhisalai, keeping her word. Adisalai brought Miyamoto home and entrusted Xiao with her care as the girl needed rest. He himself went to the dungeon. There he told Arkan that he was now safe and could move freely, but Arkan remained indifferent to everything except the search for his sister. In the depths of the dungeon, Adisalai activated a hidden area and used his sword to remove the seal that held Selena. He assigned her the task of interrogating and torturing Pak-il in order to extract the necessary information. Meanwhile, the wounded animal wandered along the narrow alleys. His strength was exhausted. He lost consciousness and only managed to notice a vague human figure ahead. The smell emanating from this man seemed painfully familiar to him. Selena managed to find out from Pak-il where he was keeping Arkan's sister. Adisalai, together with Arhan, went to the indicated coordinates and soon found a hut in the forest. Arkan suggested that it might be a trap, but his companion was sure that Pak-il would not trust such a secret to anyone outside. However, everything turned out to be more complicated than they expected. The place was guarded by a nightmarish beetle that possessed monstrous strength. He immediately attacked the uninvited guests. But thanks to Adisalaya's strength, they were able to quickly deal with the enemy. There was a secret room underground that reminded Adisalaya of the previous dungeon. The marks on the walls seemed familiar to him, as if he had seen them before. Soon, Archon noticed a capsule with a girl, his sister, inside. Massive tubes were connected to her body. After freeing her, Archon realized with pain that she would always be a target for the likes of Pak-il. Adisalai offered to transfer the girl to his dungeon and instructed his brother to take care of her. Archon was deeply grateful for the help, but Adisalai did not linger. He had unfinished business. Along the way, he ran into Selena, who was clearly showing interest in him, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. His goal was to talk to Pak-il, who was trapped in the body of a bug again. The conversation was about the incident in the dungeon, where the goblin had injured him. Pak-il said that it happened 10 years ago, while for Adhisalai it was only a few days. He realized that the dungeons distort the perception of time and reality. After that, he allowed Selena to continue torturing him until Pak-il himself begged for death. Later, Adisalai visited Miyamoto, who had already regained consciousness. The girl thanked him for his help. He tried to find out if she suspected anything about his true nature, but she had no idea yet. At that moment, Xiao's voice came from the hallway. Adisalai looked out and saw her with the new pet she had picked up on the street. However, he immediately recognized the animal's true nature. It was the player Matt, who found himself in the body of the animal. Adisalai told Xiao that he would borrow her pet for a while. In the conversation, Matt confirmed that he knew the truth about him and offered to join forces to destroy Liu. Meanwhile, Fujiwara took on the role of leader. She gathered the players and suggested that they announce to everyone that they were looking for a dungeon called the Boneyard, suggesting that it was connected to the events at the auction. After returning the kitten to Xiao and asking him to take care of him, Adhisalai received a notification on his phone from the association. A reward had been offered for finding the graveyard. He realized that the others had gotten too close. At the entrance to his own dungeon, he came across a group of players who mistook him for an ordinary participant and invited him to join. They boasted that they had a special artifact that allowed them to enter a high-level dungeon. Inside, they were met by Adisalai's subordinate, whose friendliness left the aliens puzzled. He calmly explained that she was just happy to see him. Then Adhisalai destroyed the players and gained a level up. Having reached 40, he was given the opportunity to bind another dungeon. Now he decided to act on a larger scale and choose something truly powerful, because he had at his disposal a very curious thing that could significantly facilitate the task. At the player association, a girl approached him and asked him to join their guild. They had gained access to a dangerous dungeon and wanted Adhisalai to go with them. The girl's name was Xinling. He accepted her offer, and together they went to their guild. Adhisalai was the center of attention, and the situation was heating up. The expeditionary group's commander, Black, was against Adhisalai joining their expedition. He set a condition. If the guy managed to defeat him, then they would take him with them. The soldiers gathered around were frankly skeptical that some unknown player would be able to defeat their experienced commander. Even Cruz, the guild leader, remained calm on the outside, but inside he also didn't believe that the young man was capable of dealing with such an opponent. Only Rain, his second in command, watched the proceedings with cold confidence, insisting that the boy would indeed be able to prove himself. As Black activated the Eternal Shield, the crowd erupted in cheers and approval. This artifact was considered virtually impenetrable, and many had no doubt about the outcome of the duel. Adisalai looked down for a moment, noticeably dejected by the thought that the owner of the legendary protection stood before him. But upon closer inspection, he noticed a detail that had escaped the attention of others. The shield's heart was missing the Power Stone, meaning it was, in fact, just a shell without its true power. Understanding this changed the young man's mood. This battle could be won with dignity. A shadow of a smile touched his lips, while Black was already beginning to mock him, confident in his superiority. But Adisalai calmly said that he would soon wipe that self-confidence from his face. Having activated the artifact Beast's Blood, found earlier in one of the dungeons, he felt a primordial power spreading through his body. For 3 minutes, all of his stats were increased, turning him into a living weapon. The next moment, Adisalai took off and rushed forward with lightning speed. The blow resounded loudly, and Black felt as if he had withstood the onslaught. With a grin on his face, he was about to ridicule his opponent, but then his gaze slid to his own shield. A crack appeared on its surface, which quickly spread like a spider web, and then the metal finally burst. Silence reigned in the hall. No one could believe what had happened before their eyes. Even Cruz had to admit. Victory remained with Adisalai. Black looked down, accepting defeat with difficulty. But Adisalai did not finish him off morally, and asked him to give him the broken shield as a reward. It was a relief to Black, as he was now rid of a useless piece of metal. However, the young man already knew more. If he could find the missing stone somewhere, the shield could be restored and its true power restored. In his hands, even this fragment turned into a chance to use it for something important. Rain watched the scene and mentally acknowledged that the source who had told him about Adisalai's unique abilities had not been mistaken. Cruz was also forced to agree. In front of him stood not just a player, but someone who was capable of turning the usual idea of strength and possibilities upside down. Lee asked Fujiwara why she allowed players to access the Trace Peak dungeon. She explained that she saw no reason to deprive them of the desire to test themselves in this place. In the past, he himself had once challenged this dungeon and was sure that it would be the death of anyone who went there. For him, it turned into a real nightmare. Cruz removed the seal from the entrance using a special boundary stone and opened access inside. This place was previously sealed. Adisalaya was curious about when exactly it appeared. Cruz explained that the dungeon was discovered 12 years ago. The first expedition that went there failed. According to Adisalai's calculations, this coincided with the disappearance of the Snow Elf clan. After the victory slogan, Cruz led the team inside. Their first task was to climb to the summit and find the inexhaustible glacier. Suddenly, they were attacked by snow gibbons. The battle ended successfully, and the squad was able to repel the attack. Black assured them that as long as he was nearby, they were in no danger. However, Adisalai felt that things were much more complicated. He tried to warn the others when they were attacked again. It was clear to him that the enemy was the Snow Elves. Cruz demanded an explanation from Black as to why the protective barrier had not been activated. He admitted his own mistake. Then Cruz ordered everyone to strictly obey him and follow his orders. From the top of the mountain, the elves watched the squad closely, not intending to let them escape. An uneasy silence fell around the group, seeming too unnatural. Adisalai noted that they were probably approaching an elven settlement. When they reached the place, an abandoned village opened up before their eyes. The traces of time clearly showed that no one had lived here for a long time. Cruz tried to reconstruct what happened using his abilities. It soon became apparent that all the inhabitants were dead. Someone had destroyed them without a trace. Suddenly, they were surrounded by predatory creatures that jumped out of the shadows, as if the darkness itself had come to life around them. The rest of the hunters rushed into battle, hoping to gain experience points, but Adisalai was in no hurry to join the fight, and Cruz remained next to him. When Adisalai examined one of the bodies of the slain monsters, he noticed that it was covered with numerous scars. In addition, there was a collar on the beast's neck, indicating that these creatures had previously been held captive. At that moment, one of the players noticed an elf, whose presence seemed to cut through the silence around them. He approached her, but Cruz sharply ordered him not to touch the stranger and to move away immediately. The player disobeyed and was instantly killed by her with one precise blow. Even Black's defense was useless against her power. Then Cruz himself entered into battle with the elf. He rained down powerful blows on her, but they did not reach their target. Every effort he made seemed in vain, as if fate itself stood in his way and deprived him of hope. Moreover, the final blow reflected on his own comrades, causing damage to his own people. Adisalai watched this and realized that they were facing a special level of enemy. The atmosphere around seemed to thicken. The elf moved so quickly and gracefully that her figure sometimes dissolved into the air. She easily dodged attacks, as if playing with her enemies, and each of her attacks left deep cuts on the ground. For the first time, Cruz felt like he was losing control of the battle, and his warriors began to retreat, truly terrified of this creature. His gaze and thoughts were directed at the elf. He realized that he wanted to obtain her power for himself. Adisalai noted that Cruz does not see the true nature of his opponent. The closer someone was to her, the higher the chance that she would be able to read their mind. It was necessary to attack her from a distance, otherwise the result was predictable. Cruz, realizing the threat, ordered his men to go on their next mission. He was going to continue the fight with the elf on his own. Adisalai declared that he would go forward himself, which meant for him complete freedom of action and the opportunity to act as he saw fit. He reached the top of the mountain, where the system informed him that in order to pass, he needed to destroy the glacier and then fight the dungeon boss. With one blow, he split the ice, and in the crack, a sealed Christ was revealed. Seeing him, he became furious, and, without holding back his emotions, launched a furious attack on the enemy. Adisalai noticed that Christ had hardly changed and knew he had to use all his strength. After a tense fight, he brought his opponent to his knees. Christ acknowledged that the enemy before him was no longer the same, meaning that he had been sealed for a long time. Adisalai asked him about the fate of the village. He assumed that it was destroyed by the players. Christ refused to answer, saying that the enemy was not worthy of knowing the truth. Then Adisalai revealed his weapon, and Christ realized who stood before him. His true king, the living Adisalai. However, he did not understand why he was in the body of another person. Adisalai promised to explain everything later, but first asked Christ to fulfill his will, to die here. After his death and the completion of the dungeon, he intended to resurrect it. 20 years ago, Adisalai had been in these places before. Memories came flooding back. During one of the battles, he noticed a girl with an unusual appearance. Her eyes were different colors. Then he managed to save her, and this act became the cause of deep gratitude on the part of Christ. Later, Adisalai asked the man about the nature of this strange shade of eyes, because they did not look like the eyes of ordinary elves. Christ admitted that the girl had not been simple since her birth. Her birth was the result of a tragedy. Her mother was kidnapped by ogres, and this child became the fruit of violence. Adisalai was lucky to be nearby and was able to snatch her from the hands of the captors. Christ suggested that the hero name the child himself, and he named her Serena. Years later, at the time of his death, Christ admitted that after Adisalai's departure, he did not pay due attention to the girl. Rejected by everyone, surrounded by hatred and mistrust, she gradually changed, turning into something dark and evil. The evening came when the accumulated resentment and rage burst out. It destroyed the entire village. Christ realized that if he had been able to notice her condition in time and guide her, the tragedy could have been avoided. However, it was too late now. His body gradually dissipated, and Adisalai received new experience points. Meanwhile, Cruz found himself face to face with that very girl. Now she was a strong and powerful being, dangerous to everyone around her. Despite this, Cruz was not going to retreat. He ordered his men to leave, but the warriors refused to leave him alone. The battle continued, and suddenly Serena used one of the techniques that the black she had killed had mastered. This was a revelation to Cruz. He realized that the girl was absorbing the abilities of those she killed, and now her strength grew with each enemy she defeated. During the battle, Cruz killed one of the elves, Serena's friend. Since childhood, he was the only person who supported her, and the loss drove the girl to insane rage. In anger, she froze Cruz, leaving only part of his body intact, intending to tear him apart piece by piece. At that moment, Adisalai appeared. He destroyed the ice and ordered Cruz to leave the dungeon immediately. The man wanted to stay, but Adisalai declared that he was going to sacrifice himself to save the world. Cruz promised to tell everyone about his feat. The battle began. Serena attacked, but Adisalai managed to parry her blows. She didn't understand how he managed to do it. Suddenly he laughed, and the elf realized that he was even crazier than she was. He smiled as he noted that now that he was rid of Cruz, the place would be his own. Adisalai called his best soldiers to his aid, and together they rushed at Serena. However, their attacks did almost no harm to her. He saw that her level was too high, and it would be extremely difficult to defeat her. Adisalai used all his abilities and managed to gain the upper hand over Serena. Meanwhile, Cruz got out of the dungeon, where he was met by Liu. Seeing him alive, he was surprised because he suspected that Cruz was supposed to die. The man began to suspect that it was Liu who had sent his team into the deadly dungeon. Liu admitted that he himself had encountered Serena and spoke about her incredible abilities. At this time, Adisalai's fight with the elf continued. She, realizing that her magic was not causing him any significant damage, decided to switch to physical attacks. Adisalai saw that Serena possessed techniques that were common even to powerful sorcerers. The amount of power she had managed to absorb was simply staggering. Adisalai realized that the enemy's forces were far superior to his capabilities. The demon tried to convince him to save his life, offering to take the battle upon himself, but he himself was not going to retreat. Even though the player's strength was running low, he still had hidden reserves. He drew his demonic sword and transformed into the true ruler of the underworld, the Demon King. At that moment, Serena recognized him, which surprised Adisalai, who had not expected his identity to be revealed. But despite her shock, the elf rushed to attack. At this moment, Liu, using the artifact, again opened the entrance to the dungeon. He saw the power of Adisalai's sword, and had no doubt that this was where he would receive his reward for defeating him. Following the echoes of the battle, Liu climbed to the top of the mountain, where he encountered a majestic sight, Adisalai fighting Serena. Liu intervened and struck, but Adisalai managed to destroy his rival and assert his power over the dungeon. The long-awaited clash began between the two warriors. Adisalai immediately realized that the enemy possessed colossal power and called for help from an army of demons. He even resurrected the fallen, Chryse and Serena. A battle of unprecedented proportions began. However, Liu, being the Dragon King, used dragon flames, and his fury fell upon everything around him. The damage he was inflicting was monstrous, and Adisalai was unable to cope with the onslaught. At one point, Liu destroyed Chryse right before Adisalai's eyes, which horrified the demon. He couldn't understand what level of strength the enemy was at, if even his attacks didn't bring the desired result. Liu, however, stated that he was bored with the current form of fighting. A small skirmish did not satisfy him. He revealed his true strength. Then Adisalai saw. In front of him stood a warrior of level 280, a dragon lord belonging to the demon dragon race. And at that moment he realized that such an opponent was no longer a player. But Liu revealed the truth. He was never a player. Before Adisalai stood a reincarnated demon lord. Moreover, his true appearance turned out to be much more terrible. He was a demonic king of destruction, whose name had long become a legend. Adisalai could not believe what he saw. After all, it was believed that this ruler was destroyed by the King of Eternity. However, Liu coldly pointed out that for their kind, death was only the beginning. Now he was going to finish the fight and destroy Adisalai once and for all. In the midst of this unequal fight, a girl suddenly appeared before Adisalai. He immediately recognized her. She found her master and came to him to give him what they had been guarding for a long time. After Liu noticed the artifact that was brought, he realized that it was Adisalai's heart. He couldn't allow it to return to its owner, and he directed all his forces at it. However, Mona and Selena stood in his way, trying to hold back his onslaught. At this point, Adisalai took advantage of the opportunity, took the heart, and activated it. Liu was confident that even with this artifact, the enemy would not be able to defeat him. During the fight, he seriously wounded Mona. Adisalai did not have time to resurrect her and decided to do it later. But Liu wasn't going to wait. He was going to destroy them all right now. Then Adisalai activated his true powers and for a short time displayed a might worthy of a demon king. Liu realized that he had no chance in this fight and tried to escape, but Adisalai caught up with him. He did not let the enemy escape and continued the fight. Liu, in desperation, began to beg for mercy and offered an alliance since they had a common enemy. However, such an agreement was of no interest to Adisalai. His blows became more and more powerful until they took Liu's life. For defeating a creature of such level, Adisalai received a huge reward. He reached level 70 and gained access to quests that were previously closed. After this, he resurrected Mona and asked her about the location of his real dungeons. She replied that she did not know the exact route, but she could help him get there. Adisalai told her to go with him. He left Serena in the dungeon, warning that they would soon try to seal him. Her task was to remain here and await instructions. Mona took on the form of a kitten, and together they left the dungeon. At the exit, they were met by Cruz and Rain. The men were waiting for Adisalai, hoping that he had survived his deadly encounter with a dangerous enemy. Adisalai said that it was the elf who killed Liu, but Rain did not believe these words. He said he would leave the decision on further action to his friend. Adisalai suddenly ran into a girl he had met earlier at the auction. She immediately made it clear that she knew his true nature and intentions. The girl revealed the goal that united him with the rest of the conspirators: the elimination of Li Ji and the other two awakened ones. Since Li had already been killed by Adisalai himself, it was time to take action. There was a problem, however. The awakened players were linked to each other, and if one was attacked, the others would definitely feel threatened. Adisalai explained that he had found a solution. He suggested luring Li Ji into the dungeon. In such an isolated environment, others would not be able to immediately find out what was happening. Moreover, he already had a person from Li Ji's inner circle, which made the task easier. The girl approved of his idea and confirmed that it was worth starting with eliminating Li Ji. Adisalai also added that he had two reliable allies: an awakened one known as the Beast God, and a young man who was present at the auction. The girl, in turn, asked about Miyamoto. Adisalai confessed that she does not yet know the truth about his nature, and he does not dare to open up. The girl advised him to tell Miyamoto the truth in order to find a loyal ally in her. She also shared that she had found two players and a mysterious woman who could play an important role in the future. After this discussion, Adisalai went home. There he met Miyamoto and his younger sister, who were going to get ice cream. He asked Miyamoto to talk in private and honestly admitted who he really was. Adisalai explained that he was not involved in her father's murder. Hearing his words, Miyamoto believed him and agreed to help. But Li Ji already knew who Adisalai was. Moreover, he had already killed his daughter. He was going to use this opportunity to get rid of Chang Hao's control forever. The next day, they tricked Li Ji into going to a prearranged location. Adisalai, knowing that Li Ji was able to turn corpses into spirits, decided not to use his henchmen so as not to give the enemy extra resources. Miyamoto confirmed that only the awakened had gathered at the site, and this time there would be no escape for Li Ji. When Li Ji appeared, a scene opened before his eyes. Many players had united for his death. This even flattered him, because such attention proved his strength and danger. However, he soon realized that he had been deceived, and that his comrades were secretly collaborating with the enemy. Adisalai immediately rushed to attack and dealt a powerful blow, but it was not enough. Li Ji survived. Using his abilities, he called upon the spirits of the dead to help him. Among them were the missing players and even Miyamoto's father, who had been turned into a puppet. The opponents clashed in a fierce battle. Adisalai's comrades attacked the army of the dead, led by Li Ji. Adisalai struck, but he managed to dodge and grabbed his weapon with his bare hands. At that moment, Li Ji asked if his opponent recognized him. And then Adisalai saw the truth. The infinite king stood before him. an ancient creature born of evil itself. He was neither a player nor an awakened one. He was different from them in every way. It was the embodiment of the reincarnation of the Demon King himself. They were somewhat similar to him. What he saw made Adhisalai wonder who Chang Hao would be, how powerful he would be, and whether he would have the strength to defeat him. His comrades watched what was happening with alarm, awaiting a command from their leader. Not one of them wavered or faltered, even when faced with the deadly and inexorable danger hanging over them. Adhisalai said that this was not the end, and a great battle awaited them ahead. A battle for the right to their existence. The Infinite King proved to be an extremely difficult target. He was different from any enemy Adhisalai had faced before. He had a special army created from the souls of great warriors, and this army suddenly began to be reborn. Archon couldn't allow this and used his power. It seemed to him the right decision. He directed a huge stream of power at the enemy army, trying to stop it. Adhisalai tried to call out to his ally. He shouldn't have, but he still used the destructive projectile. However, this was precisely what the enemy had to do. Archon had put all his strength into the attack, and the king had only thanked him. Adhisalai understood that in this state, the enemy could absorb energy from blows and accelerate his own regeneration. The Endless King was the embodiment of endless life, doomed to loneliness, and the horror he brought to his enemies. Activating the evil spirit's revenge skill, he sent them to Adhisalai. They surrounded him on all sides, reminding him of the victims who fell by his sword. The king declared that he had killed too many people and was now obliged to experience the hatred of all who had died at his hands. The army of the rebels was rapidly approaching Adhisalai, filling the space around it with the dead. Their countless bodies created the feeling that the air itself was filled with fear and death. However, Adhisalai himself stood without fear, his gaze focused and his heart calm. He understood that the king he was about to fight against was capable of summoning an infinite number of his pawns, capable of reviving the dead, turning the battlefield into a real nightmare for any enemy. But for him, these abilities did not matter. He clearly understood his goal and acted according to it. Adhisalai broke through the encirclement step by step, eliminating the enemies one by one, as if they were just a shadow of the past and not a real threat. The Endless King tried to break his will by reminding him of those who had recently fallen at the hands of Adhisalai. He spoke of people who had not survived his blows, of friends and allies who had died. However, these words did not shake Adhisalai's resolve. There was no time for regret. The Prince of Darkness easily repelled the attacks of his enemies. His movements were precise, fast, and deadly. Every action he took showed that he had become stronger than ever before, that the experience he had gained in fighting enemies in his past and present life had made him virtually invincible. The Endless King was shocked by what was happening. His mind could not accept such a terrifying reality. He could not believe his own eyes and realized that the force he considered invincible was powerless against Adhisalai. But even defeat did not break his spirit. He was not going to give up so easily. Seeing that the enemies he had revived, whom Adhisalai had encountered in this life, did not harm him, the king decided to move on. He decided to raise those whom Adhisalai had killed in his previous life, when he himself was a king. The first such enemy was an ancient evil spirit, a powerful creature that Adhisalai had encountered centuries ago. Even the Endless King couldn't believe that this spirit had once been defeated by him. This spirit was ancient and powerful. Its strength and power were amazing. For him, this was a proven enemy who should have supported him in battle. But the situation turned out differently. Adhisalai watched the scene with surprise. He had not expected to see such a thing. Before him stood an old enemy, a meeting with whom brought back memories of past battles. Even though he had seen the spirit before, he doubted that it would submit to the will of the Endless King. And these doubts were justified. The king's body suddenly stopped regenerating, and he did not understand what was happening. At that moment, Adhisalai clearly realized that the being he had awakened was too powerful to submit to a puny master. It was independent and its powers could not be limited by any orders. Adisalai's sword rose high, ready to unleash its fury on the enemy. The Endless King tried to stand, clinging to life with all his might, but his resistance was futile. At that moment, the reincarnation of his daughter suddenly appeared in front of Adisalai, shielding the body of the Endless King from his blow. His heart sank, but he knew it was just an illusion, someone else's attempt to use the sacred for their own purposes. The daughter has long been dead, but her image was used as a shield to cover the enemy's actions. Anger filled Adisalaya. He was not going to allow anyone to desecrate the memory of his daughter and turn her into an instrument of struggle. He clearly realized that such pathetic and vile tactics would not go unpunished. The Endless King deserves not just death, but retribution, which will be the final retribution for all his deeds. At that moment, Adisalai focused on his strength, calling upon all the power he had accumulated over the years of battle, used the experience gained in the past and present to stand firm and destroy the enemy. He understood that his opponent embodied endless horror, continuous regeneration, and immortality. But for Adisalai, these were merely tests which he intended to pass with honor and strength. The Endless King was amazed. Never before had anyone overcome his powers so easily and quickly. A huge flood of undead rushed towards him. Together they attacked their creator, tearing his body to pieces. Adisalai saw figures from the past come to life. Those he had thought long since defeated reappearing on the battlefield, destroying their king. Despite the invulnerability of his body and the endless stream of undead, the king remained alone and was now dying in complete solitude. Miyamoto saw her father approaching her. He was glad to see how his daughter had grown and become stronger. There was pride in his eyes. A moment later, his image disappeared, leaving Miyamoto alone. Adisalaya's level has risen to 150. The task has been successfully completed. A hidden awakening has occurred, unlocking the Demon King Destroyer specialization. Killing Li Ji became the condition for his awakening and elevation to a new level. To acquire the specialization, he absorbed the soul of the slain king and gained all of his stats. The system increased his damage output by 100%, turning him into a pro at fighting other demon kings. Adisalai remembered the woman he had met a couple of hours ago. She explained that she was late for the meeting because she was close to Li Ji and was trying to act cautiously. The woman assured that she was not interested in money and wealth. Her only goal was to make the dungeons and players disappear and everything go back to normal. She said that Adisalai had special permission to do this. He had not informed anyone about it. The Awakened One asked him to enter the final dungeon and go through it to understand her motives. Adisalai thought about her words, activated the system, and went on a mission to the last dungeon, ready for new challenges. He found himself surrounded by strange creatures who looked at him with hope and expectation. Each of them claimed that he was destined to save their people. The system announced to him his mission, to protect the heart of the universe, the greatest treasure of this world. Among those gathered, one of the elves stood out and called himself Shur. He explained that the place where Adisalai ended up was the home of the ghost elves. Their faith was based on an ancient prophecy. One day, a savior would appear who would protect the heart of the universe from the coming chaos. The elves expected to see a hero in him, but before them stood a creature that had just appeared in a new guise, not yet fully understanding what was happening. Despite this, Shire warned him that chaos was already approaching, and there was little time left. Their world was on the brink of destruction, and they could not allow the catastrophe to happen. Adisalai asked the main question: what is this heart of the universe for which they took such desperate steps? They explained to him that it was an ancient stone with unlimited power. For hundreds of millions of years, their people have protected it, understanding that it is the guarantor of stability and order. If chaos takes possession of this stone, the balance of the world will collapse and everything will be destroyed. He looked at his own body and realized that even in his infant form, his powers were no less than those of a seasoned warrior, like Cruz. However, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. the elves noticed the approach of enemies. With each passing minute, they found themselves in a dense ring of evil creatures that rushed to attack. In strength, they were comparable only to the weakest of the newborn players, but there were too many of them, and every second of delay threatened death. Shir, addressing everyone, declared that Adhisalai was the one who was called by the very heart of the universe. The prophecy came true, and he was to become their protector. But Adhisalai himself realized that if they had been able to summon not only his soul, but also his body, his power could have been incomparably greater. Then he thought, if the stone really had such power, perhaps its strength could be the key to salvation. However, Shur admitted that they could not control the stone. Almost all of their people's strength was spent on the summoning ritual. Moreover, according to ancient legends, excessive use of the power of the heart threatened the destruction of the elven race itself. But the situation was exceptional. They no longer had a choice. The elf led him into the depths of the sanctuary, where a stone rested, shimmering with a blinding light. It was the heart of the universe, the last line of defense. But it was at this moment that the enemy broke through the lines of defense. Waves of monsters were approaching from all sides, and the countdown was already in moments. Adhisalai, fighting with the attackers, understood that he alone could not hold them back. Then he turned to the elves with a final request, to activate the stone. Only its power could give a chance. Shur made up his mind and, contrary to ancient prohibitions, directed the energy of his heart into the universe. At that moment, the stone burst into flames, and its power fell upon him. He now possessed a stone whose power allowed him to absorb the energy of creatures that dared to attack. Adhisalai watched this process closely and intently, trying to catch every detail. He soon realized that what was happening reminded him of his own experience when he was once in the body of a goblin. The absorption of the combined entities occurred in a similar manner. Gradually, Shur reached a new level of power. This was a mystery to Adhisalai. There was no leveling system in this world that players were used to, so he couldn't understand the meaning of what was happening. Suddenly, Shire opened a huge portal before him. From behind it, numerous hordes of monsters bowed their heads before him, acknowledging his power. The second Iflika, Mu Chi, immediately noticed that the source of the portal came from the very heart of the universe. She realized that Shur had used him to enter another world. Adhisalai thought the principles of connection to other worlds were similar to the mechanisms operating in the dungeons. But Shur himself was not satisfied with this. The power he had received was not enough, and he sought even greater power. Succumbing to his lust for power, he turned his rage on the monsters, not just killing them, but subjugating them to create his own army. His desire was obvious, to subjugate everyone and become the leader of an army that could not be resisted. Elf Mu Chi immediately sensed danger. She noticed that Shur was beginning to lose control of himself. His actions became unpredictable and dangerous. Her plan was to stop him and buy time so that Adhisalai could take advantage of the moment of confusion and tear the stone from his body. However, Shur had no intention of listening to her persistent warnings and resistance. He dreamed that the ghostly elves would rise above all other peoples in all worlds and spaces. He dreamed that no one would ever be able to humiliate and oppress them again. Mu Chi resolutely opposed his devious intentions, unwilling to put up with his plans and actions. She reminded him that other races also have a right to exist, and urged him to return the heart of the universe before it was too late. As she released her power and rushed towards him, her determination was unwavering. Mu Chi knew that she had to act immediately, so she ordered Adhisalai to intervene. At that moment, Shur's heart burst out of his body. He rushed after it, trying to hold on to his precious power. But Adhisalai also extended his hand towards the stone. Realizing that his power was being taken away, Shire became enraged. His uncontrollable anger spilled out and caused a monstrous explosion. A huge wave of destructive energy crashed down on all three of them, sweeping away everything in its path and leaving chaos behind. Their mission was a complete failure. All plans were destroyed, and the consequences were catastrophic. But the system turned to Adisalai. It told him that not all was lost. The heart of the universe was inside him, and now it was up to him to protect it and bear responsibility for the future fate of humanity. Adisalai was determined to get out of this place to continue his journey, and suddenly he saw something unusual on his way. Something he never expected to see at that moment. A vision opened before his eyes. A dungeon called the Boneyard, and the figure of a young man who was there. With the help of the power of the heart of the universe, he was able to summon his own soul and transfer it into the body of this young man. From now on, their destinies were linked firmly and forever, like intertwined threads that could no longer be broken. The next test was to be passed by both of them, sharing responsibility for the new path and the upcoming task. Adisalai completed his mission in the dungeon, and the system reminded him of his main goal: to protect the heart of the universe. He realized that everything that was happening was connected to him, but the dungeon's task remained unfulfilled. At that moment, the woman behind him noticed that he had finished the test. She sensed it. The guy was surprised how she knew this, and then she called herself Mu-Ki. He realized that she, like him, was a time traveler. Their meeting was not accidental. Mu-Chi explained that the heart fragment split into 3 pieces, and each one rushed to a different time and space under its influence. To find Shira, she opened a space-time tunnel and found herself in a new world where they were now. Suddenly, multiple rifts appeared in the city, which became the beginning of an invasion of creatures from other worlds. Mu-Chi soon learned that Shira was the one who initiated this. Everything that happened was her doing. He used the power of the heart of the universe to summon the invaders and continue to absorb the power of others. But the source of his power was not ordinary creatures, but players whose constant evolution enhanced his abilities. According to Mu-Chi, if anyone stood in his way, Shir would destroy him, because he did not think it was possible to meet someone equal to him. Adisalai realized that it was up to him to stop him. Mu-Chi confirmed, adding that Shira's human incarnation was Zhang Hao. He devised an invasion plan, brought the Demon Kings, and turned the world into an arena to exterminate players by taking away their powers. Now they had to return to the dungeon and then come up with a perfect plan for confrontation. After all, over the years, Shira's strength has reached an incredible level. Suddenly a voice was heard nearby. It was Shir who had heard their conversation. He stated that he intended to kill them all and asked who would be the first victim. Despite the threat, Adisalai and Mu-Chi had no intention of retreating, as they were the ones who needed to destroy him. But their attacks only amused Shira, without causing him any harm. They reminded him of little bugs that never ceased their annoying attempts to do something worthwhile. With a sneer, he suggested that they kneel and beg for mercy, promising to delay their death for several years in exchange. Mu-Chi replied that their premature deaths would only hinder his quest for strength. Shiru didn't understand why she, as the last survivor of her race, always sided with the people instead of uniting with him. He knew that the last fragment of the stone was hidden in Mu-Ki's body. However, she stated that this was not the case at all. Perhaps the fragment was lost forever, and he would never find it. To this, Shir coldly replied that there was only one way to test this: by killing her. Today, he was going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, destroy his worst enemy, and take possession of what he desired most. The day of his triumph had come, the day when he would proclaim his victory. With the new body of a god that he had acquired, everything was now under his control. Nothing and no one could stand in his way. This is what he had been preparing for all this time, becoming more and more powerful. Adisalai realized in horror that Shir had also become a demon god, but he could not determine which one. Never before had he felt such an aura, alien, bottomless, pulling him into the abyss. Mu-Chi explained, after Adisalai crushed the Demon Kings, Shir collected their souls and distributed them to some of his minions. He allowed them to inherit the power of the previously fallen lords. Some moved into new bodies. Others subjugated the very essence of the Demon King. But Shire himself received the soul of the strongest, the ruler of all kings. His body had not yet reached its peak development, but even this was enough to eclipse them and destroy them. Shire turned to Muchi, his voice filled with contempt. He gave her a chance, and she rejected it. Now she had no right to live. Shire was going to wipe her off the face of the world. Adisalai saw how the forces of Shira tore apart space, how the walls of dimensions collapsed. Everything around was distorted and disintegrated, as if existence itself could not withstand his presence. He tried to understand what had happened to his friends, but Muchi quickly explained. Shire uses the heart of the universe to control the fabric of worlds. However, Adhisalai himself had a fragment of the stone hidden within his body, and so this power should not have affected him directly. Shire had no intention of letting Muchi interfere with him. Once he had the heart of the universe in his hands, he intended to revive his people who had fallen into oblivion. Today, everyone else was supposed to die. The world was supposed to fall at his feet. There was only one thing he didn't understand. Why Muchi fought so hard. Why she gave her life for people who could never repay her in kind. Then Miyamoto intervened. She firmly said that they would not stand aside. They will fight even if it means their death. People will also fight for their right to live. Shire laughed. He was happy. After all, their deaths would be sacrifices for the glory of the birth of a new god. He tore open the heavens with a torrent of monstrous power, but Muchi met him with a seal. Shire noted dismissively that she would only last a few minutes. No one and nothing could stop him. His power was limitless. But Muchi replied that this was more than enough time for her to be killed. She turned to Adisalai, her voice devoid of fear or doubt. Muchi stood in front of him, her breathing becoming heavier and heavier, as if every word was spoken with the last effort. She asked him to pierce her heart, without looking away, and without allowing herself to waver. There was no fear of death in her eyes, only a firm determination. It was as if Muchi had already resigned herself to the fact that her life was coming to an end, and now it was not a tragedy, but the fulfillment of a choice she had made long ago. She confessed that her body contained the power of one of the ancient demon kings. This secret had been burning inside her for many years, and only now had she decided to bear it before Adisalai. If he accepts this power, his might will increase to the point that he will be able to challenge the Shire itself. It was not a beautiful promise or hope. There was a firm conviction in her voice that this was the only way to turn the tide of their struggle. She begged him not to hesitate. Her voice held the desperation of someone who knew there was no other way. Everything they had done before, all the efforts and sacrifices, seemed like just preparation for this moment. If Adisalai retreats now, Shire will destroy everything they hold dear. Destroy his friends and family. Muchi saw this clearly, so her request sounded like the last order of fate. Adisalai remained silent. With one powerful blow, he dealt her a mortal wound. Muki's life began to fade. The Demon King's power was enormous, but he clearly understood that Shire was on a completely different level. Muchi, who was almost dying, gathered her last strength. She leaned towards him, her lips barely moving, but the words pierced Adisalai's consciousness like a bolt of lightning. It was a last, desperate idea that sounded like madness. He looked at her with bewilderment. What he heard seemed simply unbelievable. She warned him, "Now is not the time for doubts. Any indecision will end in disaster. This is their last hope, a step into the abyss that can either give them victory or destroy everything completely."